cash or just put it in the bank for a later date. However you'd spend it, make sure you don't miss out. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 3 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. On today's show, after the director of the US Secret Service dramatically resigned yesterday, today is the turn of the director of the FBI to be grilled over his bureau's investigation into the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. We'll be live at the hearing in Washington, D.C. A knife attack that left an army officer with serious injuries is not thought to be terror-related. Police say the suspected attacker may have mental health problems. We'll cross live to the scene with Mark White. And there's great news for the royal family today. Profits from the Crown Estate have more than doubled to a whopping £1.1 billion. I'll find out what that means for the King and Queen. And I'll tell you how much me and you are giving to the royals every single year. And that's all coming between now and 6 o'clock. On the show, always a pleasure to have your company. We're going to cross live to Washington, D.C. soon. The grilling of the FBI director, if it's anything like the cross-examination of the Secret Service director on Monday, it'll be astonishing. Today, the huge questions are, what motivated Trump's would-be assassin? What do we know about his movements? How did he get on that roof? How was he not apprehended? And what were his movements? Did he send a drone up over the site, as has been reported? All of those questions should be answered today. Promises to be absolutely unmissable stuff, so please stick with us. Get in touch all the usual ways, gbnews.com/your say. But before we kick off the show, it's your headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Police in Kent say the stabbing of a British Army soldier near a barracks in Gillingham is not terror-related. Officers are continuing their investigations after witnesses reported hearing a huge scream just before 6 o'clock yesterday evening in Gillingham. Locals rushed to help the soldier just in time to see the attacker, who was wearing a mask, as they fled on a moped. A suspect was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder about 20 minutes later. The victim, aged in his 40s, was taken to hospital with serious injuries. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says she's being kept up to date with the ongoing investigation.
This is an appalling attack on a serving soldier. My thoughts go to him and to his family, wishing him a speedy recovery. This is an ongoing police investigation by Kent Police. It's really important that they have everyone's support in this investigation. But this was a just appalling attack on a serving soldier, and I know that the whole country will be thinking of him and his family and wishing him a speedy recovery.
In other news, Sir Keir Starmer accused the previous government of losing control of Britain's borders as he took part in his first PMQs as Prime Minister. Reform UK's Rupert Lowe quizzed the PM on Labour's migration plans, claiming that failure to control the borders has damaged and disrupted communities. The Prime Minister conceded that small boat crossings in the Channel are a serious issue, but laid blame on the Tories.
I'm not sure I agree with his numbers, but look, I do think that it's serious that the previous government lost control of our borders. Record numbers have crossed the Channel since the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Prime Minister for 18 months, 50,000 people crossed the Channel. It's a serious issue that requires a serious answer. And that is why we will set up our Border Security Command to take down the gangs that are running this vile trade. What we won't do is waste further time on a gimmick that cost a fortune and remove just 4 volunteers.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak used today's Prime Minister's questions to call for tougher sanctions on Russia. The Leader of the Opposition said the work of the previous government had laid the groundwork for stronger action against Moscow, which he says would help fund Ukraine's reconstruction. And taking a lighter tone, the former Prime Minister joked as he sent best wishes to Britain's Olympians.
And I also join with the Prime Minister in his warm words about our Olympic athletes. Yeah. I've no doubt that after years of training, focus and dedication, they'll bring back many gold medals. Although, to be honest, I'm probably not the first person they want to hear advice from on how to win. But I'm glad in our exchanges.
Nominations open this evening to succeed Rishi Sunak as leader of the Conservative Party. Shadow Home Secretary James Cleverly announced last night he's running to take the party's top job. In a video emphasising his credentials, the former Foreign and Home Secretary said the Tories need to re-establish a reputation as the party that helps grow the economy and achieve their aspirations. GBNews spoke with people in Stamford about who they think should be Tory leader.
Oh, I think they should go bankrupt. That'd be rather lovely. There's very few decent people in the Tory party. I certainly don't want Liz Truss or Johnson back again.
Well, they should be looking to appeal to their core voters and the policies that they present. Taxation for one issue, a main issue, a reason why I failed to vote for them this time.
There are no statesmen anymore. I don't consider Starmer to be a statesman or statesman material.
In the US, President Biden will address the nation from the Oval Office later as a poll puts Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump. Joe Biden's presumed successor has a 2-point lead over the Republican nominee, according to a poll by Reuters and Ipsos. That's a change from last week when Trump was 2 points ahead of the president. It comes as Mr. Trump files a complaint with the US Election Commission in an attempt to stop Joe Biden's election funds being transferred to his vice president's campaign. Let's cross live to Washington, D.C. now, where the FBI Director Christopher Wray is being questioned about the investigation into the assassination attempt on Donald Trump.
She deeply loved the institution of Congress, and particularly the Judiciary Committee, because it gave her a platform to make a meaningful impact on the lives of millions of Americans. If Sheila took up a cause, she could be relentless in her determination to see it through, whether that meant making one extra phone call, going to one more meeting, offering one more amendment, or making one more speech. She would not rest until she thought she had done everything she could to fight for the issues she cared about. Through it all, she stayed true to her values and always had the people of Houston close to her heart. We are all better for having known her. The American people are better for having had her in their corner all these years. I will deeply miss my friend and colleague. May her memory be a blessing. I yield back.
I want to thank the ranking member. Well said. Now, Chair will recognize himself for an opening statement. July 13th was a terrible day for America. We all agree spirited debate, fighting for what you believe in, are part of what makes this country the greatest nation in the world. But the First Amendment and robust political debate are not consistent in any way with violence. What happened in Butler, Pennsylvania was a tragedy that took the life of a good man, Corey Compertor, leaving a wife without a husband and 2 daughters without a father. Others were injured, and of course, former President Trump, by the grace of God, survived the assassination attempt. There are a lot of unanswered questions about the security failures that day, questions about decisions made before the rally, questions about actions during the rally, and questions about statements made after the event concluded. Prior to the rally, why was the president's security detail denied requests for extra resources? Why weren't all the buildings secured? There were a finite number of buildings that needed to be secured. Why wasn't that done? Why was the president allowed to walk out on the stage when there was a suspicious person on the property? During the rally, what exactly happened between 6:09 and 6:14, those critical 5 minutes? We know from briefings from the director and the deputy director at the FBI and other information we've gathered that at 6:09, the shooter was identified on the roof. At 6:10, the counter sniper was notified. Counter sniper teams were notified about the shooter. 6:11, the shooter fired several shots, injuring and killing one person, injuring others. At 6:12, the counter sniper took down the shooter, and at 6:14, President Trump was escorted off the stage by Secret Service agents. We need to know what happened play by play, moment by moment, second by second, the communications that took place, again, during that critical 5 minutes. And then finally, after the rally, why did both the Secret Service and Secretary of Homeland Security Mayorkas lie to the American people? July 14th, the day after the attack, Secret Service spokesman Anthony Guglielmi said this, quote, "The assertion that a member of the former president's security team requested additional security resources that the U.S. Secret Service or the Department of Homeland Security rebuffed is absolutely false." The next day, Secretary Mayorkas said, "That is an unequivocally false assertion. We had not received any requests for additional security measures that were rebuffed." But 5 days later, top officials repeatedly rejected requests from Donald Trump's security detail for more personnel. And on the 21st of July, the New York Times, confirming what the Washington Post reported, said, quote, "Mr. Guglielmi acknowledged that the Secret Service had turned down requests for additional federal security assets for Mr. Trump's detail." 180-degree change. Why did they initially lie to us in the days after the attack in Pennsylvania? Finally, we hope to learn more today from Director Wray about the shooter, his use of the drone, the explosives that were in his car, how he got on the roof, and a host of other questions. It is our hope that Director Wray's testimony can begin to give answers to the American people about all of these questions and concerns. So, Director, we appreciate you being here, and we trust that you're going to be as transparent with the committee and the country as you possibly can. And I'm sure you understand that a significant portion of the country has a healthy skepticism regarding the FBI's ability to conduct a fair, honest, open, and transparent investigation. And that skepticism is based on what they've witnessed over the past several years. The American people have seen a Biden-Harris Justice Department that can't tell us who planted the pipe bombs on January 6th, that can't tell us who leaked the Dobbs opinion, and that can't tell us who put cocaine at the White House. Biden-Harris Justice Department who raided President Trump's home, Biden-Harris Justice Department who worked with social media companies to censor Americans, Biden-Harris Justice Department who let the country believe that the Hunter Biden laptop was misinformation when they knew at the time it was authentic, and maybe most importantly, a Biden-Harris Justice Department who retaliated against whistleblowers who came to this committee and spoke to us about these issues. Last week, we sent you 12 questions about what occurred on July 13th. We expect you to answer those questions and the others that I've just outlined. And again, we thank you for being here today and appreciate your willingness to answer the questions that the committee is going to have. And with that, I would yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, 2 weeks ago, our country witnessed a shocking assassination attempt on a presidential candidate. Now, I disagree with Donald Trump in almost every policy area imaginable. I am frequently shocked and outraged at the plans he has for our country and the words that come out of his mouth. And I have dedicated much of the last 8 years to fighting his agenda. But regardless of my strong feelings about Donald Trump's behavior, I unequivocally and unabashedly condemn with every fiber of my being the attempt against his life. This was not just an attack on a man, but an attack on our democracy. Political violence erodes the very foundations of our nation. The concepts of freedom of speech, of peaceful transitions of power, of a democratic government at its core, these cannot exist if political violence is allowed to fester and to go unchecked. And if you think that this one assassin's bullet was a bolt out of the blue and not part of a wave of violence that has threatened this nation for years, then you have missed the point of what my Democratic colleagues and I have been imploring you to hear for some time. Election workers, many of them working for free, face near constant threats of violence. In one recent instance, an Indiana man pleaded guilty to threatening to kill an election worker who said that there were no irregularities in a recent election. That man said, quote, 10 million plus patriots will surround you when you least expect it and will, expletive, kill you, close quote. That is political violence. In another instance, Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi's husband was bludgeoned over the head with a hammer by an intruder in his home who had been there to capture Ms. Pelosi, interrogate her, and possibly, quote, break her kneecaps because of her liberal views. That is political violence. The death threats surging against Vice President Harris, former President Obama and his wife Michelle, and Governor DeSantis, as well as many others, including videos online of individuals holding guns making assassination threats. That is political violence. The plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer and overthrow parts of the state government. That is political violence. The brutal, deadly attack 3 years ago against this very building, with rioters breaking through police barriers to run through these halls chanting, "Kill Nancy," and "Hang Mike Pence," and even hanging a noose outside the building. These rioters battering Capitol Police officers and forcing members of Congress and their staffs to go into hiding, squatted in spaces under desks or in closets. That is political violence. This assassination attempt, as horrific as it is, should surprise no one. And you would think a political party that almost lost their presidential candidate through an act of political violence would have something to say about the way their leaders keep talking about the next election. Donald Trump has warned there will be a, quote, bloodbath if he loses. Republican Ohio State Senator George Lang said just last week at a rally for J.D. Vance that he is, quote, afraid that civil war might be necessary if Republicans lose the November election. President of the right-wing think tank and Project 2025 leader, the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, said on Stephen Bannon's podcast, quote, "We are in the process of the second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be," close quote. Republican former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin said in August of last year of Trump's indictments, "Do you want us to be in civil war? Because that's what's going to happen. We're not going to keep putting up with this. We do need to rise up and take our country back," close quote. I could go on, but it's more and more of the same. And I hear nothing from the other side of the aisle in this room about these statements. Do you support a bloodbath if you don't get the election outcome you want? Do you justify violence if the left does not agree with you? And what exactly has preoccupied this Republican majority while their allies threaten violence to their political enemies, real and imagined? We have chased down baseless conspiracy theories designed solely to influence the 2024 election in favor of Donald Trump. We have spent millions of dollars and thousands of hours of staff time in more than 100 transcribed interviews chasing false accusations against President Biden, supporting an impeachment effort that seemed designed to fail, and hunting for a smoking gun that simply does not exist. And instead of admitting that these investigations found no corruption, coercion, or unethical behavior by the Biden administration, Republicans chose to just dig deeper and spend more money. Imagine what could have happened if we had spent these thousands of hours of staff time and those millions of taxpayer dollars addressing even one aspect of the political violence that now threatens our country. Perhaps, had this Republican majority lifted a finger to help a nation that is awash in guns, the assassin Butler would not have had such easy access to the weapon he used to fire on that crowd. Director Wray, your agency is responsible for addressing some of the most serious issues of our time. The Bureau fights gun violence, which claims the lives of 40,000 Americans every year. It protects election security from growing threats from malign foreign actors who are working tirelessly to influence our elections. It protects against domestic terrorists and violent extremists who have been a growing threat in recent years and have carried out horrific mass shootings and deadly events around the country. And so much more. I apologize to you, Director, that instead of supporting you in these missions in the 118th Congress, some of my colleagues have instead hindered your work, maligned your agents, and called to abolish and defund your agency, all for political gain. It is despicable, especially from the party that claims to, quote, back the blue. And I know that you and your many agents and employees have paid the price for these baseless attacks. I know you have faced a barrage of threats, distrust, and vitriol from the public as a result of these wild, politically driven conspiracies. I know it has become even more dangerous and difficult for you to come to work each day. I may not agree with you on everything, but I sincerely thank you and every employee in your agency who continues to protect our country. The FBI is vital to keeping America safe, and I pray that today we can focus on the real, substantive work of the agency. It is the least we owe our country in these times. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witness. The Honorable Christopher Wray has been the director of the FBI since 2017. He previously served as the Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice, the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, and Associate Deputy Attorney General, and as Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. Again, Director Wray, you've been here many times. We appreciate you being here today. And, look forward to your testimony and answering our questions. We will begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and beliefs, so help you God? Let the record let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. We have votes coming in about 10 minutes, but we definitely want to get through your opening statement as far as we can, and this is going to be an interesting day on Capitol Hill with the Prime Minister of Israel here as well. So, Director Wray, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, members of the committee. I want to begin by offering my condolences on the passing of Representative Jackson Lee, who served the people of Texas in this body and on this committee for so long. Thank you all for your support of our efforts to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. I am proud to be here today representing the 38,000 special agents, intelligence analysts, and professional staff who make up the FBI, men and women who every day work relentlessly to counter the most complex threat environment I've seen in my tenure as FBI director, and maybe in my entire career in law enforcement. Before I go any further, I also want to acknowledge and offer my deepest condolences to the victims of the horrific assassination attempt in Butler County, to the friends and family of Corey Comparator, who by all accounts lost his life protecting others from danger, to the other victims, two of whom were critically wounded, and of course, to President Trump, former President Trump, and his family. As I've said from the beginning, the attempted assassination of the former president was an attack on our democracy and our democratic process, and we will not and do not tolerate political violence of any kind, especially a despicable account of this magnitude. And I want to assure you and the American people that the men and women of the FBI will continue to work tirelessly to get to the bottom of what happened. We are bringing all the resources of the FBI to bear, both criminal and national security. Now, there's a whole lot of work underway and still a lot of work to do, and our understanding of what happened and why will continue to evolve, but we're going to leave no stone unturned. The shooter may be deceased, but the FBI's investigation is very much ongoing. To that point, I also want to acknowledge that I recognize both the congressional and the public interest in this case and the importance of this investigation to the American people. And I understand there are a lot of open questions. So while the investigation is very much ongoing and our assessments of the shooter and his actions continue to evolve, my hope here today is to do my best to provide you with all the information I can, given where we are at this point. I have been saying for some time now that we are living in an elevated threat environment. And tragically, the Butler County assassination attempt is another example, a particularly heinous and very public one, of what I've been talking about. But it also reinforces our need at the FBI and our ongoing commitment to stay focused on the threats, on the mission, and on the people we do the work with and the people we do the work for. Every day, all across this country and indeed around the world, the men and women of the FBI are doing just that, working around the clock to counter the threats we face. Just in the last year, for example, in California, the FBI and our partners targeted an organized crime syndicate responsible for trafficking fentanyl, meth, and cocaine all across North America. We charged the Mexican-based suppliers who brought the drugs into the United States, a network of Canada-based truck drivers who delivered the drugs, and the distributors in the United States who spread the poison into our communities. Staying on threats emanating from the border, I have warned for some time now about the threat that foreign terrorists may seek to exploit our southwest border or some other port of entry to advance a plot against Americans. Just last month, for instance, the Bureau and our Joint Terrorism Task Forces worked with ICE in multiple cities across the country as several individuals with suspected international terrorist ties were arrested using ICE's immigration authorities. Leading up to those arrests, hundreds of FBI employees dedicated countless hours to understand the threat and identify additional individuals of concern. Now, the physical security of the border is, of course, not in the FBI's lane, but as the threat has escalated, we're working with our partners in law enforcement and the intelligence community to find and stop foreign terrorists who would harm Americans and our interests. As concerning as the known or suspected terrorists encountered at the border are, perhaps even more concerning are those we do not yet know about because they provided fake documents or because we didn't have information connecting them to terrorism at the time they arrived in the United States. Staying ahead of today's threats demands that we work together. And for the FBI, that means doubling down on our partnerships, especially with state and local law enforcement. Whether it's working through our hundreds of joint terrorism task forces, to build out source networks to identify those who slip through the cracks, or targeting the worst of the worst responsible for the violence that still plagues far too many communities through our Safe Streets task forces, or taking the fight to the cartels responsible for trafficking the dangerous drugs like fentanyl, pouring into our country and claiming countless American lives. Staying ahead of the threat also means continuing to disrupt the cyber criminals ravaging businesses, large and small, and confronting nation states like China, targeting our innovation and our critical infrastructure. At the Bureau, we're proud to work side by side with our brothers and sisters in federal, state, and local law enforcement, our partners in the intelligence community, and others around the world to fulfill our commitment to keep Americans safe. Now, on Friday, the FBI will celebrate its 116th anniversary. 116 years of protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution. 116 years of working with our partners to safeguard the communities we serve. 116 years of innovating to stay ahead of the complex, evolving, and very real threats out there. I am proud of the legacy the men and women of the FBI have built and all they have accomplished for the American people. So, if I may, as we approach this week's anniversary, I would just like to say to all those who are part of the FBI family, from our current employees to our formers and to our partners across law enforcement and the intelligence community, thank you. Thank you for dedicating your lives to this country and to its people. It is both humbling and an honor to serve alongside you, and I look forward to the work we're going to continue to do together. And with that, thank you again for having me, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Director Wray. Excuse me. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, I'm way down here, and I appreciate the chairman giving me this because I've got to leave. But let me ask this question. Why doesn't the FBI disclose to the American people all of the investigative detail and evidence that you are gathering as it is gathered?
Well, we have tried to be transparent with both Congress and the American people as we're going along in the investigation, frankly, unusually so for an ongoing investigation, given the sheer nature of it. We have provided a lot of information. I expect to continue to provide information. I expect to be able to provide some additional information here today in response to your questions and your colleagues. But part of the issue is that, as like in any investigation, as we proceed, facts evolve. Our understanding of what somebody said turns out to have more context that we didn't have before. We have additional leads out there. So part of our goal is not just to respect the ongoing investigation process, but also to make sure that we don't prematurely provide information that then 2 days later turns out to be different than what we told people, because that's very much, kind of a natural part of any investigation.
So, did Crooks fire 8 shots?
We have recovered 8 cartridges on the roof.
Why was Crooks allowed to get off 8 shots?
Well, that, I think, is something we're still digging into. Again, maybe this is a good place for me to make clear the different investigations that are going on. So, because certainly I understand.
Well, and given that I've only got 3 minutes left, and I know other members, I'm really interested because I appreciate your invitation. You said you're prepared to disclose things as questions are asked. So I don't want to waste time. I just want to get to the questions that might, and as many members as can, ask questions that you'll answer. I actually think I'd be glad for you to go on soliloquy, frankly, and tell us what you know. I think the American people want to know. Why was President Trump not kept off the stage?
We don't know the answer to that, but I want to be clear, and this is important because I think it goes to questions that I can and cannot answer. Our investigation, the FBI's mandate, is focused on the shooter and all things related to his attack. Now, obviously, I understand very much the intense interest and focus on the Secret Service's performance, actions, decision-making, et cetera. There are 2 separate after-action reviews, the DHS Inspector General and the outside independent panel that's been convened that are focused on that. Now, our investigation will obviously overlap with that.
Here's the problem. We're out 13 days, and you say we've been disclosing. You know, we had the director, or the colonel from the Pennsylvania State Police in front of Homeland yesterday. He was quite candid. He disclosed to us that Butler Emergency Services Unit personnel were posted into the windows on the 2nd floor of the AGR building, that they left there to go pursue the person that they spotted, Crooks, that they texted a photo of Crooks to the PSP representative in the command center. That information was relayed to the United States Secret Service. They asked that it be texted to someone else. That was many minutes before President Trump took the stand. What we don't know is why were they not keeping him off the stand? And to the extent, I know we always hear when there's a criminal investigation, you got to wait for that to develop. But do you have any reason to, do you have any other target of your criminal investigation other than Crooks, who's dead?
We are investigating the shooter both to determine his motive and his preparations and activities before the shooting, but also to make sure whether or not there are any co-conspirators, accomplices.
At this point, have you developed any evidence to so suggest that there are any accomplices or cooperators or assisters?
Not at this time, but again, the investigation's ongoing.
So here's the thing. While we wait, maybe for months, and I hate to say this, I'm not trying to take a pot shot, but the country went for years with the understanding that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation as offered by respected former intel officials, and the whole time the FBI had the laptop, and then let that happen in public until finally offering testimony in a case. To the degree we wait to hear as a country and as a Congress what has happened in this event, because the FBI is conducting an investigation, it provides quarter for the U.S. Secret Service not perhaps to reckon with the problems that are obvious to everyone. So let's get a couple in while I've got 13 more seconds. One more question, perhaps. Senator Grassley says that the records of the day show that there was a counter unmanned aerial surveillance operator on site. Was there? And why did that person not prevent crooks from being able to use a drone?
So again, questions about the Secret Service's performance are better directed to those other reviews. What I can tell you when it comes to drones is that Crooks himself had a drone, and I'm prepared to answer questions here today about the shooter and his use of the drone, for example.
My time's expired.
Gentleman yields back to ranking members recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said in my opening statement, political violence is a scourge and entirely unacceptable, no matter the source or the target. Last October, far-right conspiracy theorists broke into Nancy Pelosi's home and bludgeoned her husband. Prominent Republicans mocked the attack and promoted conspiracy theories about it. Last August, an armed Utah man who threatened to kill President Biden was killed as FBI agents attempted to serve a warrant on him hours before President Biden landed in his state. Some on the right claimed that the man was simply a, quote, Second Amendment enthusiast. In recent weeks and months, those on the right have repeatedly called for, quote, civil war, with an Ohio state senator saying that if Republicans lose the election, quote, it's going to take a civil war to save the country, and it will be saved. The president of the Heritage Foundation likewise said that, quote, we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be, close quote. Director Wray, it's obviously important that we respect First Amendment protections, but there is clearly a point at which some violent rhetoric crosses over into threats of violence or leads to actual violence. Could you describe how the FBI looks at this relationship between rhetoric and action and what you are seeing around the country?
So I appreciate the question, and this is an issue that I've been talking about for some time. In our view, there is a right way and a wrong way under the First Amendment to express your views, no matter how passionate or even angry you are. And violence and threats of violence is not the right way. And we don't care what you're upset about or who you're upset with. When, from the FBI's perspective, when it turns to violence and threats of violence, that's when we have to draw the line. That's when we get engaged. And there is an alarming phenomenon that we've seen over the last several years of that kind of passion and heated rhetoric turning into actual violence and threats of violence. We've seen it against public officials of all sorts. We've seen it against law enforcement. The number of officers shot and killed in the line of duty in this country is, frankly, outrageous and alarming. And I know that because every time an officer is shot and killed anywhere in this country, since the day I started as FBI director, I personally call the chief or the sheriff to express my condolences and to talk to them about the victim's family. And the number of those shootings that are ambush related, meaning somebody is targeting law enforcement because they're law enforcement, is particularly alarming. I have made around 400 of those phone calls. It's almost every 5 days that a law enforcement officer is killed in the line of duty. And that is an example of the kind of ways in which passions and heated rhetoric can bubble over into violence.
Thank you. Members of Congress, their families, and their staffs have witnessed an alarming rise in threats against them. I appreciate the work your agency has done to investigate and address these threats, but I'm concerned that we do not seem to be stemming the tide. What is the FBI doing to ensure that members of Congress, their families, and their staffs are safe?
So we have a very close relationship with the Capitol Police, and we have members of the Capitol Police, for example, who are on some of our task forces. We share intelligence information about things that we're seeing, trends that we're seeing with Capitol Police and others in law enforcement. Obviously, if we have specific information about an effort to target a member of Congress, then we're getting with Capitol Police in a much more specific way. But those are some of the things that we're doing.
Thank you. Now, Director, your office is leading the investigation into the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Republicans in Congress, including members of this committee, have repeatedly called for defunding the FBI. What impact would defunding or even just limiting your funding have on the FBI's ability to conduct this and other investigations?
So I understand that there are heated views, opinions about us, just like there are about every institution in today's America. But cutting our funding is incredibly short-sighted, and the people it really hurts are state and local law enforcement and the American people we're all sworn to protect.
Thank you. During my remaining time, I want to turn to a different matter. In recent days, Republican members of Congress have attacked presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris as a, quote, DEI candidate, which presumably is code for women and person of color. It's not a new theme for them. In May, Chairman Jordan wrote to you claiming that because of DEI initiatives, the FBI is no longer hiring, quote, the best and brightest candidates to fill the position of special agent. With my remaining time, Director Wray, can you please answer the following questions? Is it true that hiring women and people of color means that FBI is no longer hiring the best and the brightest to serve as law enforcement officers? Is there any evidence that women and people of color are less effective in law enforcement roles? And what message does it send to prospective applicants when their leaders demean them and make judgments about them based solely on their race or gender?
Witness may respond.
So any notion that we have lowered our standards, our hiring standards, is just not accurate. In fact, our standards are as competitive and selective as ever. We have tens of thousands of people applying, and our selection rate is about 3.1%, which is more selective than just about any university in the country. And most of our applicants, I think something like 50% of them are coming from military or law enforcement backgrounds. About 50% of them also have advanced degrees. The average age is around 31, which means they're bringing a wealth of personal and professional experience when they arrive. And to suggest that those people, because of efforts related to diversity or anything like that, are less qualified, frankly, is not at all consistent with what I see, having visited all of our field offices and seen these young people in action, and I think is an insult to those hardworking men and women who've signed up to dedicate their lives for this country.
Thank you, Director. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Director, let me go back to where Mr. Bishop was. Tell me about the drone. You act like you wanted to fill us in on that. Fill us in.
So we have recovered a drone that the shooter appears to have used. It's being exploited and analyzed by the FBI lab. The drone was recovered in his vehicle. So at the time of the shooting, the drone was in his vehicle with the controller. In addition, our investigation has uncovered.
Do you know what time of day he flew it, and if he flew it on the day of the shot?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So in addition, it appears that around 3:50 p.m., 4 o'clock in that window, on the day of the shooting, that the shooter was flying the drone around the area.
2 hours.
About 11 minutes. I want to be clear, but when I say the area, not over the stage and that part of the area itself, but I would say about 200 yards, give or take, away from that. We think, but we do not know. So again, this is one of these things that's qualified because of our ongoing review, that he was live streaming, viewing the footage from that, again, about 11 minutes in around the 3:50, 4 o'clock p.m. range.
2 hours before, he's flying a drone in the vicinity of the route.
About 200 yards away, yes.
Yards. Okay, that's important information. What about the bombs that we've heard about in the shooter's car?
So again, the FBI lab is exploiting those explosive devices. Yep. We've recovered 3 devices, 2 in his vehicle and 1 back in his residence.
Are these what you would call, your experts would call sophisticated operations, or this? I don't know. That's what I've been told by people who have some understanding of this area.
Yeah, I think it's We've seen more sophisticated and less. I would say these are relatively, again, keyword relatively crude devices themselves, but they did have the ability to be detonated remotely. And so to that point, in addition to the two devices that we recovered out of his vehicle, there were receivers for those two explosive devices with the devices. And then on the shooter himself, when he was killed by law enforcement, he had a transmitter with him. Now, I do want to add one important point here, is at the moment, it looks to us, again, ongoing review, and I can't say that too many times. At a moment, it looks like because of the on-off position on the receivers, that if he had tried to detonate those devices from the roof, it would not have worked. But that doesn't mean the explosives weren't dangerous.
And I'm sure we're going to get into all these subjects a little bit later as well. Tell us what you can about the encrypted platforms we've heard about.
So one of the things that we're drilling into hard with the shooter in an effort to try to learn more about his state of mind, his motive, his ideology, his context, everything else, is to look at all of his devices, any social media accounts he had, et cetera. And one of the things we've learned in finally getting into his phone, which was also a significant technical challenge from an encryption perspective, but in addition, once we got on the phone, it turned out he was using some encrypted messaging application.
And again, the same question relative to the bombs. Was this pretty sophisticated, or is this is the kind of the norm you see with folks like, similar situation? How would you describe
on this subject, I would say this has unfortunately now become very commonplace, and it's a real challenge for not just the FBI, but state and local law enforcement all over the state.
Tell me exactly the scope of, does the scope of your investigation include what I call that critical 5 minutes from when the 6:09, when this is based, I think, on the information you've given to Congress, 6:09 when the shooter's identified on the roof, and 6:14 when President Trump is ultimately escorted off, and all that happens, the shots that take place in between there. Do you have access to the communications that were going on at the time in that critical 5 minutes?
So our investigation, when you say scope, our investigation includes that time frame, although focused again on the shooter himself and his day.
Now, as involved in that, he's obviously involved in that time frame.
Correct, and as part of that, as part of our focus, our investigation of the shooter and the attack, of course, we are interviewing law enforcement from the scene, because those are some of the most significant witnesses, and we're obviously getting access to their materials and that kind of thing. And the Secret Service has been fully cooperative.
You have access to the communications that exist there.
That exact question, I don't, as I sit here at the moment, I don't know the exact answer to that question, but I know that Secret Service has been cooperative with us.
The Congress would like access to those communications as well. I mean, not just that 5 minutes, although I think that's the critical time frame. There's lots of communications we'd love to have access as well. I see my time is up, and they have called votes on the floor. I think there are about 6 minutes left in votes, so the committee will stand in recess until approximately 10 minutes after votes conclude on the House floor.
Well, astonishing evidence there from Washington, D.C. That's the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, being cross-examined by Congress. And let's get some reactions to that now. I'm joined by Greg Swenson, who's the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Greg, welcome to the show. Greg, astonishing evidence there. 3 key points that really leapt out of that evidence there, Greg Swenson. The first one was that the shooter put a drone in the air. Thomas Matthew Crooks put a drone in the air 2 hours before the shooting, a significant confirmation of the rumour that had been going around, Greg Swenson.
Yeah, Martin, it's just every day there's another revelation that the Secret Service, and in this case the FBI, is being somewhat dishonest. You had the first denial immediately out of the gates that they denied that the Trump campaign had asked for additional protection, and then 5 days later came clean and admitted that the Trump campaign had indeed requested and were denied. So, this is just another case of distrust with the FBI, with justice, with the Secret Service. And I think Jim mentioned that in his introduction. Many cases where the FBI has dug their own grave and really created this distrust. I think the most obvious was the 51 alleged intelligence officers claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, when in fact they had the laptop and were quite aware that it was valid in 2019. So they had it for at least a year. And then secondly, they were involved in the Russia collusion hoax at the beginning or before the election in 2016 and continued to run with it. So this is not an institution that should be trusted right now. I'm putting my faith in the congressional investigation that's led bipartisan by Hakeem Jeffries, who's the minority leader, the Democrat minority leader, as well as Mike Johnson, who's the Speaker of the House.
Okay, Greg, but specifically putting back to today's revelations, the second big revelation there was confirmation 2 explosive devices in the car of Thomas Matthew Crooks with receivers and a detonator, a detonation device on his person when he was shot dead by a sniper on that sloping roof. So the clear link here that he may have had the ability to set off 2 bombs as well.
Sure. I think you'll see more of that coming out in the next few days, next few weeks. So obviously there were missteps here. And the fact that he was spotted at 6:10, but nothing was done about it until he fired off 8 shots and was finally shot himself 2 minutes later. That's just way too long. If they had their sights on him, he should have been taken out. And the fact that that people were seeing him on the roof and nothing was done. So there's just a long list of missteps by the FBI, as well as more importantly the Secret Service.
And Greg, also he said there, Christopher Wray, the FBI director, no evidence of any accomplices. So seems to be at this stage a lone operator, a lone wolf. But what we haven't got into yet, Greg Swenson, was any of the questioning around the motives. Was this a politically motivated attack? Many people, of course, think it must be piece of domestic terrorism. Do you think, Greg Swenson, the FBI will reveal the information of what was on the shooter's phone? Those reports, they have photographs of Donald Trump and maybe a history of disliking Donald Trump. Do you think we're expected to hear that, or do you think they'll keep a lid on that evidence?
I think ultimately they'll have to, and I think when they're subpoenaed in front of Congress, they'll have to divulge that when they get it. I think these arguing about the encryption, maybe there's some validity to that, but again, there's so little trust in these institutions at this point because of the way they've behaved for the last 8 years that I'm looking forward to having the subpoenas from Congress. I think that will work ultimately. In the meantime, they've just really stumbled on themselves. The Secret Service, obviously with Kimberly Cheadle resigning yesterday, that's, maybe a good start, but they've made a lot of mistakes lately. They've denied additional protection for President Trump. They've rejected protection for people like Robert O'Brien, the former national security advisor, who's on the list by the Iranian mullahs, by the Ayatollah, and has death threats against him, and they pulled his Secret Service protection. So I think they've got a lot to answer for, Martin.
And Greg, the Democrat spokesperson there, the Senator North Carolina, was pulling in some mentions of, is it because there are so many guns on the streets that this was allowed to happen? It was a clearly politically motivated attack against Republicans, trying to pull in threats, online threats against Kamala Harris as a broader spectrum of political violence. He was kind of looping that all into the same Venn diagram as an attempted assassination. And of course, Greg Swenson, a lot of people watching in the UK will be quite surprised by the highly political nature of this questioning in America.
Right, Martin, it's a great point. Gerald Nadler, who was the congressman that was going on and on about all these right-wing extremists and threats. It was President Trump who was shot. The assassination attempt was on President Trump, and of course he twists it into all the alleged right-wing extremists and all these terrible things and terrible threats to Democrats. He slipped in Ron DeSantis in there just to be, somewhat polite, but it was a long list of grievances, and that's not really the point here. The point is the failings of the Secret Service. Doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. I mean, it's nice to see some bipartisan respect here, and you've seen that from other Democrats, but not from Gerald Nadler. He's just a political hack, and that was obvious today.
And Greg, another key point that one of the Republican senators made was, will the FBI release this evidence in a timely fashion, and will they do it voluntarily? And as you say, he then referred to the Hunter Biden laptop, the clear intimation that the FBI had the evidence all along. They refused to release that evidence. They let the conspiracy theories, they let the media narrative take a hold. They had the evidence. They didn't release it. Greg Swenson, do you fear the same thing might happen here? And why would they withhold evidence if that's the case, when it's clearly a huge issue of national interest and political safety?
Yeah. Look, Martin, it's the cover-up. They've covered up President Biden's cognitive issues for 3 years now, maybe 4, and especially in the last few months. So it's always the cover-up, and I think you'll see that. Maybe the scrutiny is just so great right now that they won't be able to do that, but they've surely done it in the past, working with the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016 on the Russia collusion hoax, and again with the 51 intelligence officers, covering up the Hunter Biden laptop. So it's always the cover up. I think you're seeing that already here. And you saw that, again, with the denial right out of the gates by Anthony Guglielmi, who is the spokesman. And then 2 days later, there's a job posting. This is public information on the government website, a job posting for a public affairs specialist for the Secret Service. And the salary on that is $130,000 a year. That's twice what an actual Secret Service agent gets, in his first year, his or her first year, it's somewhere in the low 60s. These are people risking their lives. So this is not about the rank and file. Those are brave people that, risk their lives. You saw the human shield around President Trump. This is the management. This is the senior level rot. And you saw that, again, back in 2016, right through President Trump's first term. And you're seeing it again with the public denials. You're seeing it again from hacks like Gerald Nadler, who are just obsessed with protecting their own brand.
OK, Greg Swenson, we'll have to leave it there. Just if you're joining us at the end of this hour, the evidence so far has revealed there was a drone 2 hours before the shooting from 200 yards away that the shooter put up Thomas Matthew Crooks. 2 explosive devices found about his person with a transmitter on him, receivers and the explosives in the car. We'll go back to the hearing into the assassination attempt on Donald Trump when it resumes in a few minutes' time. Simply unmissable testimony coming up. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. Don't go anywhere. We're going straight back to that soon. It's time for your weather. And here's Aidan McGibbon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Following a bright start to Wednesday in many places, it is now turning increasingly cloudy with outbreaks of rain moving into the west. This frontal system is coming in after a ridge of high pressure led to a fine start, and we'll keep the sunshine in the evening in the east, 1 or 2 showers, but otherwise largely dry, whilst elsewhere thickening areas of cloud, increasingly low cloud as well, leading to widespread mist, hill fog and drizzle across western parts, along with outbreaks of more persistent rain, especially towards the southwest. But with the increased cloud and humidity, it's going to be a mild, some might say muggy night, 16 Celsius by dawn in a few spots. But in the south and especially the southwest, extensive low cloud, mist, hill fog and some more persistent rain pushing into the south of Devon and Cornwall. Across Wales and much of the rest of England, it's cloudy first thing, the worst of the damp and gloomy weather over western hills. Northern Ireland, likewise extensive cloud, a few showers, showery rain affecting western Scotland, but some brightness early on across parts of eastern Scotland. Really limited brightness, to be honest, with a lot of cloud affecting many parts of the UK. And through the morning and early afternoon, we're going to see some heavier and more prolonged bursts of rain affecting southern counties, increasingly pushing east through the day. Elsewhere, skies will turn brighter, the sun will come through in a few spots, but also some showers into the northwest, and feeling cooler because of the increased cloud cover across many parts of the UK. Now we're going to see those outbreaks of rain in the south and southeast continuing into Thursday evening, perhaps turning heavier again for a time, before eventually that clears away. And Friday's effectively a day of sunny spells and showers. The heaviest showers will be in the north, likewise for Saturday, and it will be a bit cooler.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. We've got the usual queues on the M90 northbound in Perth and Kinross up towards junction 12. That's the Broxton roundabout. Long delays on the M8 eastbound in Glasgow. That's all due to an accident at junction 13 Provan. Queues on the M1 northbound in Leicestershire. 2 lanes closed there for an accident just before junction 23 for Loughborough. We've got delays on the M25 clockwise in Buckinghamshire. It's all due to an accident between junction 16, the M40 and 17 Maple Cross, although all lanes have reopened as the accident has been moved onto the hard shoulder. Long delays on the M25 clockwise in Surrey. 2 lanes closed for an accident between junction 9 Leatherhead and 10 the Wisley interchange in the roadworks, and it's slow on the M20 westbound in Kent due to an earlier broken down vehicle near Leeds Castle. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
£30,000 in cash has to be won. It's our biggest cash prize so far, and it could be yours. Charles was a winner. Listen to what he says about winning the Great British Giveaway.
I'm Charles. I won £18,000 cash. It was just amazing, and as soon as it goes into your bank account, it just changed. It's a life-changing thing.
The next big winner could be you, with an extra £30,000 cash in your bank. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hey, very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the House of Westminster and all across the UK. On today's show, FBI Director Christopher Wray has been facing gruelling questions on the failures surrounding the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Giving evidence in Washington, Wray says the FBI will leave no stone unturned in their investigations. We'll have full details and some astonishing revelations there. Next up, a knife attack that left an army officer with serious injuries is not thought to be terror-related. Police say the suspected attacker may have mental health problems. We'll cross live to the scene with Mark White shortly. And with the Tory leadership challenge due to drag on until November, today former Foreign Secretary James Cleverly threw his hat into the ring, adding, "Only I can unite the Tories." Should the Conservatives choose Cleverly, or is the smart money on a more right-wing leader? And there's great news for the royal family today. Profits from the Crown Estate have more than doubled to a staggering £1.1 billion. I'll find out what that means for the King and Queen. And I'll tell you how much me and you are giving to the royals every year. That's all coming between now and 6 o'clock. Want to show, always a pleasure to have your company. Astonishing evidence once again for the second time this week from Capitol Hill in Washington. First, it was the time of the Secret Service director. She resigned dramatically yesterday. Today, it was the turn of the FBI director, Christopher Wray. Astonishing evidence on the shooter who attempted to assassinate Donald Trump. The bombs in his car, the detonators about his person, the photographs on his phone, the drone he put up, simply unmissable stuff. We'll be cutting back to that for a short second session. But first, get in touch all the usual ways, gbnews.com/you'll say. But before all of that, it's your headlines. It's Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, our top story today, police in Kent say the stabbing of a British Army officer near a barracks in Gillingham isn't being treated as terrorism at this stage. Detectives are continuing with their investigations after witnesses reported hearing screams just before 6 p.m. yesterday in Gillingham. Locals rushed to help the Army officer just in time to see the attacker, who was wearing a mask, as he fled on a moped. The suspect was arrested later on suspicion of attempted murder. The victim, aged in his 40s, was taken to hospital with serious injuries despite efforts by his wife to protect him. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, says she's been kept up to date with the police investigation.
This is an appalling attack on a serving soldier. My thoughts go to him and to his family, wishing him a speedy recovery. This is an ongoing police investigation by Kent Police. It's really important that they have everyone's support in this investigation. But this was a just appalling attack on a serving soldier, and I know that the whole country will be thinking of him and his family and wishing him a speedy recovery.
Yvette Cooper. Now, the Prime Minister has accused the previous government of losing control of Britain's borders as he took part in his first PMQs at the dispatch box today. Reform UK's Rupert Lowe quizzed the Prime Minister on Labour's migration plans, claiming that failure to control the UK's borders has damaged and disrupted communities. The Prime Minister conceded that small boat crossings across the English Channel are a serious issue, but laid the blame at the foot of the Tories.
I'm not sure I agree with his numbers, but look, I do think that it's serious that the previous government lost control of our borders. Record numbers have crossed the Channel since the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Prime Minister for 18 months, 50,000 people crossed the Channel. It's a serious issue that requires a serious answer. And that is why we will set up our Border Security Command to take down the gangs that are running this vile trade. What we won't do is waste further time on a gimmick that cost a fortune and remove just 4 volunteers.
Meanwhile, also in today's PMQs, Rishi Sunak, the former Prime Minister, used today's session to call for tougher sanctions on Russia. The Leader of the Opposition said the work of the previous government had laid the groundwork for stronger action against Moscow, which he said would help fund Ukraine's reconstruction. And on a slightly lighter note, the former Prime Minister joked as he sent his best wishes to Britain's Olympians in Paris.
And I also join with the Prime Minister in his warm words about our Olympic athletes.
Yeah.
I've no doubt that after years of training, focus and dedication, they'll bring back many gold medals. Although, to be honest, I'm probably not the first person they want to hear advice from on how to win. But I'm glad in our exchanges.
The former Prime Minister there, Rishi Sunak. Now, Eluned Morgan is set to become the first Minister of Wales after making it to the first woman to take on the top job. The 57-year-old Baroness, who is the Welsh Health Minister, was the only contender to lead Welsh Labour after nominations closed today. She's replacing Vaughan Gething, who announced his resignation last week after only 4 months in the job. Though she's formally announced today, she won't immediately become First Minister, as that requires a confirmation vote in the Senate. Now, you've probably been watching GB News this afternoon, and in the United States, the director of the FBI has been questioned by lawmakers over the investigation into the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Christopher Wray has been telling the House Judiciary Committee that the FBI would leave no stone unturned in its investigation. He also acknowledged that there were still open questions about how the attack happened. He also clarified there's no evidence at this time, he said, that the gunman plotted the attack with anybody else. Mr. Wray's appearance comes a day after Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle resigned over her handling of the shooting. President Biden's expected to address the nation from the Oval Office in Washington later on today, as a new opinion poll puts Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump. Joe Biden's presumed successor has a 2-point lead over the Republican nominee. That's according to a new poll that's been put out by Reuters and Ipsos. And it's a change from last week when Trump was 2 points ahead. Well, this comes as Donald Trump files a complaint with the US Election Commission in an attempt to stop Joe Biden's election funds being transferred into his vice president's campaign. Now, a diver has discovered a bronze cannon on the shipwreck of a warship that was destroyed by a gunpowder explosion back in 1665. The 17th century ship, called the London, formed part of a convoy sent in 1660 to collect Charles II from the Netherlands and restore him to the throne. The prized cannon was discovered buried in silt and clay on the seabed, where the protected wreck lies in 2 parts. Guess where? Off Southend Pier in Essex. Who'd have thought? Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst. I'm back in half an hour with more. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now we start with the latest on the investigation into the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, has been facing questions in Washington, D.C. A quick upsum of the astonishing evidence that came out of that session. 3 big points leapt out. Firstly, there was no evidence of any accomplices working with the shooter, Thomas Matthew Crooks. Secondly, he did put a drone up in the air about 2 hours before the shooting to survey the area. About 200 yards away that went up, but that gave the shooter a clear aerial map of the zone before that shooting. Huge questions about how that was allowed, how that happened. And literally the most explosive piece of evidence that came out was that in the shooter's car, and we still don't know where that car was parked. I think that would be a fascinating question to come up in the next session, which we'll cross back to live shortly. 2 explosive devices were found in that car with receivers on them, and on the shooter's body, when he was shot dead by snipers, was a transmitter. Now, it's not clear if he'd have had the ability to explode those devices, but that was a clear intent. And another explosive device found at Thomas Matthew Crooks' home by the FBI. So 3 bombs in total, a drone went up, and at this point, no evidence of any accomplices, and also encrypted messages on his phone. The FBI still going through the rigorous process of getting into them. Huge amount of evidence to come through, huge amount of questions to ask so far. And I believe now we in Congress is the reporter for the Daily Mail, Morgan Phillips. Morgan, welcome to the show. An astonishing body of evidence in that short session there. And I suppose we can expect much more to come.
Yeah, definitely. We can expect a particularly combative hearing after Monday. The Secret Service director was on Capitol Hill, and that hearing ended with bipartisan calls for her to resign. She ultimately did so 1 day later. A lot of her answers she punted to the FBI. She said that would be a question for the FBI. She said that the investigation was ongoing and she couldn't reveal certain things. So now FBI Director Christopher Wray has emphasized that he's going to be as forthcoming as he can. He emphasized that there are 2 separate investigations. His investigation is focused on all things related to the shooter, his method, his motives, and the Secret Service investigation is focused on the security breach and how that happened.
And it's quite surprising for British viewers to see just how political the questioning is. Democrats, congressmen were trying to steer this back onto the proliferation of guns in America was the problem, trying to fan this out into the broader political violence context of bad things or tweets said about Kamala Harris. And then meanwhile, the Republicans were going hard on the Hunter Biden laptop, and the FBI, almost they were implying, were complicit in withholding information in that case to protect the Biden administration. And the clear question was, would there be the same intimation that could be happening again here? So for British viewers, a very, very politicised and aggressive questioning environment, Morgan Phillips.
Yes, definitely. We knew from the start that this hearing would focus not only on the assassination attempt, but also on what Republicans are calling the weaponization of the FBI. And like you mentioned, we've already had a reference to the Hunter Biden laptop and a member of Congress asking, why should we trust the FBI if they were in possession of the laptop, as its veracity was in question years ago.
And as far as the encryption of the devices, a huge question now, there's been all along, what was the motivation of the shooter? Was there a political motivation? Was he driven by some kind of hatred or dislike against Donald Trump? Thomas Matthew Crooks, we heard very early on, was a registered supporter of the Republican Party, but that doesn't mean he was affiliated with it. I mean, a lot of people in Britain might become a member of the Labour Party so they can influence the leadership in a negative way. But many, many questions to be asked, Morgan Phillips, about the motivation. Why did Thomas Matthew Crooks get on that roof? Why did he pull the trigger? Do you expect we'll learn that from this afternoon's session?
I expect that there will definitely be a lot of questions focused on that, on his motive. As you mentioned, he was a registered Republican. He did make a small donation to the Biden campaign previously. So I think we'll have a lot of questions on that to come.
And how political do you think this is going to get in terms of its central part in the nomination and the presidential race in forthcoming towards November?
I expect it'll get very political, as you mentioned. A lot of Democrats are bringing this back to gun violence and the need for stricter gun laws. Republicans have taken to saying that this is, a divine election, that it is their destiny to win by the fact that the former president was spared when the bullet just grazed his ear last week.
Great stuff. Well, thank you very much for joining us. That's the Congress reporter for the Daily Mail, Morgan Phillips. And, of course, we'll cross back live to that testimony as soon as it restarts. We'll have lots more on that story throughout the show. And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com. And you've helped to make it the fastest-growing national news website in the country. Now to the latest on the soldier who was stabbed yesterday, and police are not treating the incident as terror-related. The man, who was wearing army uniform at the time, was seriously injured after he was repeatedly stabbed by a masked attacker. Well, GB News' Homeland Security editor Mark White is in Gillingham at the site of this brutal attack. Mark White, what do we know so far? Any details on the motive or the identity or anything at all new come out, Mark White?
Well, nothing on the motivation. The last word we got from Kent Police was that they hadn't yet established a motivation. They say they've not found anything so far to suggest a terrorist ideology here, so it's not, it seems, going in the direction of a terrorist investigation. They've pointed to the possibility of mental health issues, but of course, even with mental health issues, that doesn't necessarily mean someone hasn't been influenced or radicalised by another or an ideology. So we'll see in the weeks and days ahead where that investigation goes, but nothing to suggest terrorism at this stage. Now, throughout the afternoon, we have got police forensic teams who've been here this area, combing it inch by inch, looking for clues to piece together the events of yesterday evening, when just before 6 o'clock this officer in army uniform was walking on the roadway behind me when he was attacked and stabbed multiple times. Now, we have obtained doorbell camera footage. It doesn't show images of the attack, but you can quite clearly hear in the background the attack taking place, the blood-curdling screams. We should warn our viewers and listeners that it makes very distressing listening. Now, that camera footage was provided to us by Alex Reynolds, a neighbour just a couple of doors up from here. And when he heard all of these screams, despite the clear risk, he wanted to push forward to come down here to see what help he could offer. This is what he told us he saw.
Thought immediately that it was perhaps just a scuffle in the street, perhaps on the neighbouring street. But as the screams became more harrowing and piercing, you realised that it was something more serious. I think initially my father said not to go out, but a minute later I went out to sit to the corner and could see a good 6 or 7 people around the victim, around the body that was lying on the pavement.
Well, throughout the day, senior politicians and military leaders have been expressing their thoughts, their shock and horror and their good wishes for the victim and the hope that he has a speedy recovery. We were hearing just a short time ago from the Defence Secretary, John Healey, who's out in Germany. This is what he said about those events last night.
My thoughts are with the victim and his family. The best wishes of our government and everyone who serves in our armed forces are with him. Our thoughts are with the family, and we want to see him make a swift and full recovery.
Well, the scene of this attack remains sealed off today, as does the spot where the main suspect was arrested, not far from here in Rochester, just about a half hour after this attack took place. A number of knives were also seized at the scene of that arrest.
And Mark White, terrible links have been made, of course, to the attack on Lee Rigby, and an eyewitness from the scene who also said that when the guy's wife came out and started to pull the assailant off and claimed that the attacker only had his sights set on hurting a British soldier. The parallels seem chilling to the Lee Rigby case.
Well, absolutely, in the sense that, of course, this was a British Army soldier, an officer on this occasion in uniform, attacked and brutally stabbed. And, of course, Lee Rigby, we know, I covered it 11 years ago when he was stabbed to death, almost beheaded outside those army barracks in Woolwich, southeast London. On that occasion, though, the two attackers, Michael Adebowale and Michael Adebolajo, were very clear in their motivation, saying to anybody who would watch them as they were filmed that they were doing this for their terrorist ideology. Interestingly, when it went to trial, though, Michael Adebowale's defence teams tried to claim that he suffered from mental illness at that time, but both men were still jailed and sent to prison for life.
Thank you, Mark White from Gillingham, for giving us the latest on this harrowing attack on a British soldier. Thank you very much. Now, one of the 7 Labour MPs who lost the whip after rebelling has said she was the victim of a macho virility test. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
An employment tribunal has found that a senior lawyer telling a legal secretary that she looked nice created an intimidating environment and made her feel violated.
Well, she's won her sexual harassment suit, so is saying someone looks nice acceptable in the workplace anymore?
Well, joining us now to debate this is political commentator Christine Hamilton, who thinks it should be, and author and journalist Rebecca Reid, who thinks making comments like these are unnecessary. OK, Rebecca, why is it unnecessary to tell your colleague they look nice?
Well, how somebody looks at work shouldn't be particularly important or relevant, but I think my issue here is that it's used as a sort of dismissive way to make women feel silly for complaining about things. Like, oh, it's just saying you look nice, why does it matter? But we all know there are different ways of saying things, and if you are an older man in a position of power, looking a woman up and down and saying, oh, you look nice, in a lascivious tone, which, as far as we know, is quite possibly what happened, that's not acceptable, that's not workplace appropriate, and it would make somebody feel uncomfortable.
Christine, she's right, Rebecca, isn't she? It depends how it's said. If you've got someone who's sleazy saying, oh, you look nice, you're going to be a bit off-put, aren't you?
Yes, we don't know whether this was said in a lascivious tone or not, and as far as I can see this particular case, the boss went too far and he did a lot of other things as well. But what worries me is that the tribunal has ruled that just saying you look nice could be included as sexual harassment. Now, I think that is ridiculous.
Realistically, women don't make these accusations for fun. Women don't make these accusations to be difficult. They do it because they've been made to feel unsafe or unable to work in a certain place.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:24. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. Now, later in the show, I discuss the report that's revealed that profits from the Crown Estate soared to a staggering £1.1 billion last year. Talking of money, there's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win £30,000 in the Great British Giveaway. It's our biggest cash prize of the year, and it's totally tax-free. Now, what would you do with that bumper bag of cash? Well, here's how you could win the lot.
£30,000 in cash has to be won. It's our biggest cash prize so far, and it could be yours. Charles was a winner. Listen to what he says about winning the Great British Giveaway.
I'm Charles. I'm on £18,000 cash. It was just amazing, and as soon as it goes into your bank account, it just changed. It's a life-changing thing.
The next big winner could be you, with an extra £30,000 cash in your bank. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Get stuck in now. Moving on, an MP suspended by the Labour Party for rebelling over the two-child benefit cap says she was the victim of a macho virility test. Zara Sultana and 6 others lost the whip for backing an SNP motion to abolish the welfare limit. And I'm joined in the studio. No, in fact, no, we're now going back to Washington to head to the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, who's giving testimony.
On a political figure, you immediately assume there's a political motive, and that may be the case here. We don't know yet. But I was interested in what you're seeing on his phone. The press has reported that he had pictures not only of Mr. Trump, but of Mr. Biden and various other members, political figures. Can you discern, was there an element of, mainly Republicans, maybe Democrats? Was it all over the board? Can you enlighten us about that?
Well, this is a place where it's particularly important for me to reiterate the caveat that I've included before, because in this instance in particular, we have a lot of legal process out for additional accounts and things like that that the shooter is associated with. So we're hoping to learn more, and we're still exploiting a number of the digital devices. Right. I think it's fair to say that we do not yet have a clear picture of his motive, and I think it's important for me to explain, because I understand, of course, why everybody wants to know the answers to those questions. Often in an investigation, from interviewing people that the subject was in close contact with, looking at the individual's social media accounts, messages, often things, physical evidence in the person's residence. You might see a manifesto, things like that. We're not seeing that yet, but we are digging in hard because this is one of the central questions for us. What I can say is that the shooter appears to have done a lot of searches of public figures in general, but so far we're seeing kind of news articles and things like that, and so the images that have been reported about, really what we're talking about there are when you do a news search of an article, the image appears in the cache, as opposed to like a search for that specific individual. But again, I really want to be clear that that's a place that we're doing a lot of work right now, and so more to come on that.
Well, I thank you for that clarification. We're interested also in the role of access to weapons when it comes to this terrible crime. The shooter used a semi-automatic rifle, really a weapon of war, that sadly has also been used in mass shootings around the country, including in my own district. It seems to me that the assault weapons ban that was once in place has to be a part of the national answer to curbing the epidemic of gun violence in America. I wonder if you could, with your help, Director Wray, understand a few aspects of the investigation. It's my understanding that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, was quickly able to trace the gun's purchaser, using records from an out-of-business gun store, records that the government is required to correct. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have suggested that collection should stop. There have been efforts to digitize it, which have been resisted. Can you tell us about how the origin of this gun purchase was discovered and the technology used?
I guess what I can say is we located a number of firearms associated with the shooter and his family. I think it was a total of, 14 in the house. The weapon that he used for the attempted assassination was an AR-style rifle that was purchased legally, that he is my understanding, acquired, bought actually from his father, who was the one who originally bought it, again, legally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired, so I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Director, I'll try to ask questions that are answerable too. I think that's been done pretty well on both sides. You do the advanced threat assessment and deliver that information as to the general threat and then specifics as to protected people to the Secret Service. Is that correct?
Well, sort of. The Secret Service does a threat assessment, but they're doing that based on intelligence that they receive from a number of sources, including, of course, the FBI. So we share, whenever we have threat information related to a particular individual or a protectee, then we share it with the Secret Service at a number of levels.
So you're a participant, but ultimately the responsibility for threat assessment as to these individuals belongs to the Secret Service?
Well, again, the threat assessment for the individual belongs to the Secret Service, but we are an important part of that because we share threat information, if we have any. They get threat information from a variety of sources. So,
and you get them from that same variety of sources. They've got no sources that are excluded from the FBI, do they?
Well, I don't know. I'm not aware of any that are excluded from the FBI, but they may receive information that comes directly to them that didn't come to us.
Sure. Okay. Director, do you believe that former President Trump was a high-risk threat under your assessment?
Well, I believe that former President Trump, really, frankly, like any president or former president, is a very high-profile figure and attracts a lot of, unfortunately, of the kind of threats we've been talking about.
It's fair to say, not on a scale of 1 to 1,000,000 with little nuances, but on a scale of 1 to 10, President Trump's risk was very similar to a current president, very similar to, because he was the presumptive nominee and leading in the polls and so on, that he was a high risk by any standard. Is that correct?
Certainly, there's a reason why he has so much protection around him.
Okay, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of assassinated senator and the nephew of an assassinated president, would you say he was also, as a presidential candidate, at significant risk?
Well, again, I think any presidential candidate raises some level of risk. It might vary from candidate to
candidate. But it's clearly a risk. Okay. In a nutshell, the day before this attack, President Trump was documented not to have gotten on multiple occasions from the Secret Service what they asked for. The day after, it looks like they're getting more. The day before, RFK had been denied by the president multiple times, Secret Service protection. The day after, he now has it. So now my question is the actions of a 20-year-old with a lone gunman on a roof sufficient to change the risk assessment in your mind for President Trump and RFK, or are we just realizing the threat that was always there and being more appropriate in matching it? And I know that's a little vague, but you've been at this for a long time. Hindsight is 20/20. Now that we have hindsight, is it fair to say that giving Robert F. Kennedy Jr. security, upping the security, including drones, overhead support for the president, former president, these are all things that in hindsight should have been done the day before?
Well, let me try to answer your question this way. Of course, as I said, the assessments of the level of security to be provided to individual protectees.
No, I understand it's a Secret Service decision.
But what I would say to you is that, and I've been saying for quite some time, including in front of committees of this Congress, that we are in an elevated threat environment, and we have been for some time. And that comes from a variety of quarters. It is, quite frankly, a dangerous time to be a prominent public official.
And in regards to that, the other side has spent a lot of time talking about what people on the right have said. But there was an attempted assassination on a Supreme Court justice. We have had the highest-ranking senator on the other side of this body saying that there were actions, that they were accountable. We have had multiple members of Congress in both the House and the Senate berating the character of members of the Supreme Court as a result of their decisions made, both, sometimes 6-3, sometimes unanimous, whatever. Are those comments, not any one of them, but are those comments and the generation of that sort of, oh, this guy's bad for democracy, this Supreme Court justice is a threat to democracy, is that the kind of thing that raises the threat level, and would you caution against that?
Well, I do believe that we've seen an increase in threats of violence, which again, that's the FBI's lane, not rhetoric, no matter how despicable or heated it is, but violence and threats of violence. We have seen an uptick in threats towards judges, among other prominent public officials, including, as you say, a case that we helped investigate involving a threat to a sitting Supreme Court justice.
An attempt.
An attempt.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. I think it's a reflection of a broader phenomenon that we are seeing in this country, where people, again, very passionate, I respect that, very angry, I respect that, but there's a right way and a wrong way to express yourself when you're angry. And violence and threats of violence just can't be it. And that's where we fit in. It's not my role as FBI director to call out, particular people's rhetoric. There's a place for that, but that's not my role as FBI director. But when it turns to violence and threats of violence, that has to be treated as unacceptable, and that's the way we look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Director, when did the FBI learn that Iran was threatening President Trump's life?
Okay, that's the continued questioning of FBI Director Christopher Wray in Washington, D.C. In that session there, 3 key pieces of information came out. First of all, we do not have a clear picture of the shooter Thomas Matthew Crooks's motivation at this stage. Secondly, 14 firearms were found at the shooter's house. Christopher Wray, quick to point out they were legally purchased. The assassination attempt gun itself, purchased by the shooter's father, was then legally given to the shooter. And then concluded by saying he had been looking for multiple public figures on his computer, and then said, we are currently in an elevated threat environment. It's a very dangerous time to be a presidential nominee. We'll cross back to that questioning later throughout the show, of course. Now, if you want to get in touch with us at GB News, simply go to gbnews.com/your say. And I'll read out the best of your messages a little later in the show. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
She could have said Stump.
you made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm joined now by Stefan Kyriasis to give us the latest on everything theatre.
So, yeah, we're going in first with Starlight Express, which is back. It's not in the West End. It's out at Wembley at the Troubadour Theatre, which is a big, almost kind of warehouse space, which suits because, as you know, have you seen the show?
Starlight Express was my first ever musical. I must have been about 7 or 8 years old. I only saw it once, but I remember it being magical.
Well, this one, it's 1984 it started, and it's still running in Bochum in Germany in a huge arena. So basically what we've got, they've slightly tweaked it, and it's a little boy or little girl, depending on the cast, going to bed, obsessed with toy trains and dreaming of trains. Everybody is dressed up. To me, it looks like a cross between Tron and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. I don't really think any of them look remotely like a train, but hey, the songs are Andrew Lloyd Webber. It's pop mixed with kind of cod 1950s rock and roll, some power ballads. The lyrics are politely like something out of an old speak and spell machine or something. You know, he's a steam train, they're out of date, he's being bullied by the diesel and the electric, and he falls for this carriage, the first-class carriage, New Girl Pearl, and he wants to impress us, who enters a race, and that's pretty much it. And when the races happen, all these barriers come up around where we're sitting, the lights are flashing, the music's thumping. It's utterly ridiculous, and I felt like a kind of teenager that was huffing sherbet dib-dabs off a giant block of sugar. It's so much fun, and the really crucial thing about it all is that somehow, in the middle of all of that, I just felt myself getting into the story. And when Pearl and Rusty have their little duet, I was very moved, and there's this big starlight sequence, which is the inspiration, the magical starlight that he's seeking. It's beautiful.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday, we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:40. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Later in the show, I'll ask if James Cleverly is really the right man to replace Rishi Sunak. After the shadow Home Secretary said he'll stand in the Tory leadership race. Is the smart money on Cleverly? Moving on, this week, new figures have shown that the tourist tax in Venice has netted an astonishing €2.4 million in its first month. Now, the proposed motorhome tax on the Isle of Skye and an anti-British tourist backlash brewing all across Europe. Today, I'm asking, will tourism taxes become the new normal? And who better to ask than our intrepid travel guru, Simon Calder. Simon, welcome to the show. Always a delight to have you. Where are you today is the big question.
Well,
Simon.
Martin, I'm in exactly the place where you're going to see the maximum number of tourists, which is in central London on Westminster Bridge. You've got the London Eye behind me. And, of course, you've got the Houses of Parliament just across the river. It is absolutely swarming with tourists here. And actually, as a Londoner, I think that is fantastic, because I appreciate, Martin, that there is nothing like inbound tourism for a destination. It's the closest you can ever get to free money. All the people here are spending cash, creating jobs, paying taxes, supporting amenities that wouldn't otherwise exist if it wasn't for the tourists who pour into London. And it's the same in pretty much every other part of the world, but I do accept that in some places, including the ones you mentioned, so Venice, where they're trying to deter day trippers, the beautiful island of Skye, where, thank you very much, they've had quite enough of camper vans, and indeed Barcelona, Mallorca, the Canaries, where they've been kind of taking it out on tourists. They think that the balance has shifted. And I'll add to that list, if I may, Amsterdam, where they're cracking down on British stag and hen parties. You have been warned, Martin.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, because I'm thinking about taking my kids to Amsterdam on a weekend break. Perhaps I should rethink that. But on a serious point, do you think, Simon, that the tide of, you're right, free money, but there's no easier way to take an extra chunk of free money off tourists than to charge them to even enter the city? Venice has raised €2.5 million in a single month, and they're not doing anything. It's a simple tax on any hotel accommodation in the area. Do you think we might see the same in Britain? It has been mooted before in Scotland, in Wales, in Skye, in areas of outstanding natural beauty, even in cities such as Manchester. Do you think politicians like Sadiq Khan behind you at City Hall there might be thinking, I'll have a bit of that?
Well, look, there is absolutely nothing wrong if a particular location decides, yes, we want to have a tourist tax. Good luck to you. There will be people like me who think, actually, I don't want this. We've currently got a hotel tax in central Manchester. It's a complete fact, because it's not actually enough. It's just £1, which is enough to be a complete nuisance, because you have to queue up separately sometimes to pay it, but it's not enough to do anything meaningful. I'm much more in favour of things like the Venice tax, where it's saying, yeah, we are absolutely beautiful. If you want to come here, and it doesn't apply all the time, if you're prepared to go on a wet Wednesday in November, which, by the way, is a much better time for enjoying the most beautiful city in Europe, then you're not going to get taxed. And it's entirely up to places. Meanwhile, there are about 99.9% of places who would love a bit of over-tourism. They don't have enough tourists, and they would welcome them. So it's great that this discussion is being had, but I certainly don't have any problem about going to Spain myself. The main issue, I think, is one of property very often, particularly in Spain. You've got lots of people staying in Airbnbs in Barcelona. That's often apartment blocks which should be housing stock for the locals, not for tourists like you and me. We should be staying in hotels. They were built for us.
And that brings me on to my next point. Do you think Airbnb is the centre of all of this? Are you buying up the properties, you're renting them out to tourists, locals can't afford to live there? We get the same in Britain, in our beautiful coastal towns. We get them in these big cities on the continent. They're angry they can't afford it. Do you think Airbnb might find themselves on the receiving end soon of some kind of room tax, some kind of room levy that might go back into local economies to help mitigate all the anti-tourist rhetoric?
Well, yes, and Airbnb started off as a brilliant idea. It was a kind of bit of a kind of San Francisco hippie thing. Here you are, you can sleep on a couch because there's not enough hotel space in town, and I'll make $25 and you'll have a cheap night. That's great. What it's developed into is an industry. And I'm very, very happy to go back to Airbnb as it was. And I've had some nice stays with actual real people. But all too often, it is simply a way of saying, yeah, here's an alternative to a hotel. And by the way, the only way we've got this is by squeezing it from the locals' stock of places they could actually live. New York's actually had some really good rules which say you're not allowed, if you've got an apartment block that could be rented to somebody, you are not allowed to sublet it for short stay guests. And so therefore in New York, the problem never actually arose. And I'm all in favour of every community doing exactly what it thinks is going to be the best thing. And then we tourists, well, luckily, many, many destinations are available. If we don't like the rules or the taxes in one place, we've got loads of other places to choose from.
Well, Simon, can I quickly ask you about this motorhome tax on the Isle of Skye? Because guess what? Motorhomes fill up on the mainland where the petrol's cheaper. They fill up on food where the food's cheaper. They don't spend loads of money in hotels and restaurants because they're motorhomes. This is called people being canny, and people with caravans too might be watching this nervously now, Simon Cowder, thinking, well, are we going to start getting taxed simply because we're clever?
Well, yeah, look, and I absolutely appreciate there is a fantastic community of motorhome owners. I talk to them, and it's great to hear the kind of freedom of the road. But the thing is, their freedom of the road becomes absolute congestion, not just on the Isle of Skye, but on a fantastic road trip called North Coast 500. Exactly where you say, they add to the congestion, but they do not add anything to the local economy. Whereas a good tourist will always be staying locally, maybe in a proper bed and breakfast, going out for meals, just creating jobs and being part of the place, meeting people as well. And I've noticed when you're in a motorhome, you don't really meet that many people. Tourism has to be more than just about money.
I don't know about that. I think motorhomes, for me, it's a life goal. Anyway, Simon, always a delight to speak to you. Thank you very much there. Fantastic stuff. Now, moving on. The weather's not been great so far this summer, has it? Or is it? Because apparently that's not been the case everywhere. In fact, according to scientists, Sunday and Monday were actually the world's two hottest ever days. And joining me now to discuss this is senior meteorologist at British Weather Services and friend of the show, Jim Dale. Jim, welcome to the show. So we've had the two hottest days ever. Tell us about the mercury busting temperatures and why you think it's happening.
Yeah, well, you've got to go back to 2016 where it first sort of hit the sort of Richter scale as far as these world temperatures are concerned. And ever since then, we've had about 50 times when the records have been broken. So year on year, and now 2023, 2024, that you just mentioned, the Sunday and the Monday, both of those beating the record. So how does the record actually originate? Well, what it is it's about 8,000 stations across the globe, and that will include Greenland and Antarctica and the Arctic itself. So it's not just, areas with large conurbations, with large populations. It's also other more remote areas. Now, you put that all together in terms of the maximum and the minimum temperatures. They do the number crunching, and hey presto, you get to a point where we end up with a figure that has surpassed the previous one, and it did it 2 times in the last week. And I dare say we're going to get more of that, mainly in the Northern Hemisphere, by the way, because that's where most of the landmass is. It's where most of the population are, so that's where the effect is. But I would say quite categorically, this is a one-way street. These graphs are just simply going upwards in a straight line. And to be frank with you, and I'll say this openly to viewers, this is a line in the sand for climate change deniers. Let's make this absolutely clear. This is extremely serious in terms of the direction of travel. And these records are not made up. They're absolutely where they need to be from the European Weather Bureau, Copernicus, and they crunch the numbers. They're scientists. They do the right thing. If they were the other way, they would say so. We wouldn't break the records two in a row.
It's worth pointing out, Jim, of course, the climate has always changed. We've had this conversation many times before. The temperature at the moment, relative to thousands of years ago, is actually cooler now than it was thousands of years ago. And we're actually in a period of interglacial warming. So it's not quite a situation of the world's burning, is it?
Well, it is actually burning because there's lots of wildfires going on at this moment in time and getting worse by the second. What you've got to appreciate is what we're talking about here, going back to about the 1600s, is what we're talking about in terms of modern day records. Yes, we can go back, we can look at other ages, etc., where humans weren't so much influential. We all know what's influencing the atmosphere and climate change, and that is fossil use. No, it's not the sun, and it's definitely not volcanoes as prescribed by the Reform Party. So let's make this absolutely clear. It is the use of fossil fuels, emissions into the atmosphere that is keeping us in.
But there weren't fossil fuels thousands of years ago when the temperature was hotter than it is now. It's always, the climate's always changed. It's called the sun.
Yeah, what you're missing here, Martin, is the accelerated rate. That's what you're missing. It's the actual movement since the Industrial Revolution, but particularly this last 20 years and absolutely this last 5 years. This is why we're seeing these records broken, no other reasons. And then the catalyst of that, or the results of that, are the major heat waves that we're seeing in many of the populated areas of the United States, of Europe, and of China as well. In these northern hemispheres, plus the wildfires, plus the extreme floods. It's just getting worse day by day, week by week, and that's where we're at now. So this is what I mean by a line in the sand. We got to admit that things are not what they should be, and this is because of the population strength, if you like. In other words, the number that we've got, it puts these pictures that you're showing, it puts populations at risk. And that's exactly what you're saying. And you've been reporting on this, and certainly I have, for the last 2 or 3 years. It's going to get worse.
Okay, Jim, talking about a line in the sand, I noticed you've got a palm tree coming out of your head there. You've posted a picture on social media. You're in Thailand. I think we've got a picture of your legs we can show on screen there. So how come the climate's, if global warming is so hot in Britain, how come you cleared off to Thailand, Jim?
Okay, well, we've got an office in Bangkok, actually, a newly operated office. So we do some charity work here. Nobody's saying you can't fly. And by the way, I do offset the carbon on my flight every single time. So make that absolutely clear. Nobody's saying don't fly. We just say fly a bit less, eat a bit less beef, for example. These are the things we can do. Little bits, not huge, massive movements. We might need them in the future, though. There we go.
OK, Jim Dale, you're always a pleasure to have on the show. You're always a good sport. Enjoy your holiday. Thanks very much for joining us live there from Thailand. Thank you. Now, as a new way for you to get in touch with me, send your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/you'll say. But a knife attack that left an army officer with serious injuries is thought to not be terror-related. Police say the suspected attacker may have mental health problems. More on that soon. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. And that's your weather forecast with Aidan McGibbon.
Warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Following a bright start to Wednesday in many places, it is now turning increasingly cloudy with outbreaks of rain moving into the west. This frontal system is coming in after a ridge of high pressure led to a fine start, and we'll keep the sunshine in the evening in the east, 1 or 2 showers, but otherwise largely dry, whilst elsewhere thickening areas of cloud, increasingly low cloud as well, leading to widespread mist, hill fog and drizzle across western parts along with outbreaks of more persistent rain, especially towards the southwest. But with the increased cloud and humidity, it's going to be a mild, some might say muggy night, 16 Celsius by dawn in a few spots. But in the south and especially the southwest, extensive low cloud, mist, hill fog and some more persistent rain pushing into the south of Devon and Cornwall. Across Wales and much of the rest of England, it's cloudy first thing, the worst of the damp and gloomy weather over western hills. Northern Ireland, likewise extensive cloud, a few showers, showery rain affecting western Scotland, but some brightness early on across parts of eastern Scotland. Really limited brightness, to be honest, with a lot of cloud affecting many parts of the UK. And through the morning and early afternoon, we're going to see some heavier and more prolonged bursts of rain affecting southern counties, increasingly pushing east through the day. Elsewhere, skies will turn brighter, the sun will come through in a few spots, but also some showers into the northwest, and feeling cooler because of the increased cloud cover across many parts of the UK. Now we're going to see those outbreaks of rain in the south and southeast continuing into Thursday evening, perhaps turning heavier again for a time, before eventually that clears away. And Friday's effectively a day of sunny spells and showers. The heaviest showers will be in the north, likewise for Saturday, and it will be a bit cooler.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. Queues on the M8 eastbound in Glasgow. It's currently blocked due to an accident at junction 13 Provan. Queues on the M1 southbound in South Yorkshire. There's a lane closed due to a vehicle having a tyre change just after junction 38 for Woolly. Slow for the M6 northbound in Cheshire due to an earlier accident between junction 20, the Lim interchange, and 21 for Woolston. Queues on the M1 northbound in Leicestershire. It's stop-start just before junction 23 on the northbound stretch. That's all due to an earlier accident, and we're also seeing it slow in Leicestershire on the M69 northbound, just heading up towards junction 21 of the M1. And queues on the M4 westbound near Bridgend. The outside lane is closed for an accident between junction 36, the Sarn services, and 37 for Pyle. That's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Don't miss your chance to win our Super Summer Giveaway. With your chance to win £30,000 cash, our biggest cash prize to date, which means you get to spend every single penny however you like. What plans would you make with an extra £30,000 cash in your bank account? Take your family on the ultimate holiday, buy that treat that's always seemed out of reach, or just put it in the bank for a later date. However you'd spend it, make sure you don't miss out. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Go and get another glass of that bubbly, you've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News. I'm broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK on today's show. A knife attack that left an army officer with serious injuries is not thought to be terror-related. Police say the suspected attacker may have mental health problems. We're, of course, live to the scene for an update shortly. Coming up, FBI Director Christopher Wray has been facing grueling questions on the failures surrounding the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Giving evidence in Washington earlier, Wray says the FBI will leave no stone unturned in their investigations. We'll have a full update. And there's great news for the royal family today. Profits from the Crown Estate have more than doubled to £1.1 billion. I'll find out what that means for the King and Queen. And I'll tell you how much me and you will give into the royal coffers every year. That's all coming up in your next hour. Well, to show, always a delight to have your company. So what a huge week it's been in American politics. On Monday, the director of the Secret Service was gruelly questioned. She resigned yesterday. Today, it's the FBI director's turn. Christopher Wray, some astonishing revelations have come out. What's the motivation behind the shooter? How on earth did he go undetected? And could he have been an even more serious threat? The answer is yes. And we'll have a full update on all of that coming soon. But get in touch the usual ways. This is your show as well. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get in touch. But before we do the final hour, it's your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Well, at just after 5 o'clock, these are the latest GB News headlines. Police in Kent are saying the stabbing of a British Army officer in uniform near a barracks in Gillingham is not being treated as terrorism at this stage. Detectives are continuing with their investigations after witnesses reported hearing a huge scream just before 6 o'clock yesterday evening in Gillingham. Locals rushed to help the officer, including his wife, just in time to see the attacker, who was wearing a mask, speed off on a moped. A suspect was arrested, though, on suspicion of attempted murder about 20 minutes later. The victim himself, aged in his 40s, was taken to hospital with serious injuries. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, says she's being kept up to date on the investigation.
This is an appalling attack on a serving soldier. My thoughts go to him and to his family, wishing him a speedy recovery. This is an ongoing police investigation by Kent Police. It's really important that they have everyone's support in this investigation. But this was a just appalling attack on a serving soldier, and I know that the whole country will be thinking of him and his family and wishing him a speedy recovery.
Yvette Cooper there. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has accused the previous government today of losing control of Britain's borders as he took part in his first PMQs as Prime Minister. Reform UK's Rupert Lowe quizzed him on Labour's migration plans, claiming that the failure to control the UK's borders has damaged communities across the land. The Prime Minister conceded that small boat crossings across the English Channel are a serious issue, but he laid the blame on the Tories.
I'm not sure I agree with his numbers, but look, I do think that it's serious that the previous government lost control of our borders. Record numbers have crossed the Channel. Since the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Prime Minister for 18 months, 50,000 people crossed the Channel. It's a serious issue that requires a serious answer. And that is why we will set up our Border Security Command to take down the gangs that are running this vile trade. What we won't do is waste further time on a gimmick that cost a fortune and remove just 4 volunteers.
Sir Keir Starmer. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak used today's PMQs to call for tougher sanctions on Russia. The leader of the opposition said the work of the previous government had laid the groundwork for stronger action against Moscow, which he says would help fund Ukraine's reconstruction. And taking a lighter tone, the former Prime Minister joked as he sent his best wishes to Britain's Olympians in Paris.
And I also join with the Prime Minister in his warm words about our Olympic athletes.
Yeah.
I've no doubt that after years of training, focus and dedication, they'll bring back many gold medals. Although, to be honest, I'm probably not the first person they want to hear advice from on how to win. But I'm glad in our exchanges.
Early in Morgan is set to become the next First Minister of Wales, making her the first woman to take on the top job. 57-year-old Baroness Morgan, who's the Welsh Health Minister, was the only contender to lead Welsh Labour after nominations closed today. She's replacing Vaughan Gething, who announced his resignation last week after only 4 months in the job. Though she's been formally announced today, she won't immediately become First Minister, as that requires a confirmation vote in the Senate. Now, in the United States today, the director of the FBI is being questioned by US lawmakers over the investigation into the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Christopher Wray told the House Judiciary Committee that the FBI would leave no stone unturned in its investigation. He also acknowledged, though, that there were still open questions about the attack, and he clarified there's no evidence at this time that the gunman plotted the attack with anyone else. Mr. Wray's appearance comes a day after Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle resigned over her handling of the shooting. And staying in the United States, President Biden's expected to address the nation from the Oval Office in Washington later on today, as a poll puts Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump for the first time. Joe Biden's presumed success has a 2-point lead over the Republican nominee. That's according to a new poll that's come out by Reuters and Ipsos. And it's a change from last week when Trump was 2 points ahead of Joe Biden. And it comes as Donald Trump files a complaint with the US Election Commission in an attempt to stop Joe Biden's election funds being transferred to his vice president's electoral campaign. A diver has discovered a bronze cannon on the shipwreck of a warship that was destroyed by gunpowder in 1665. The 17th century ship called the London formed part of a convoy sent in 1660 to collect King Charles II from the Netherlands and restore him to the throne. The prized cannon was discovered buried in silt and clay on the seabed, where the protected wreck lies in 2 parts just off Southend Pier in Essex. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst and I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. And we start now with today's top story, and that's the latest on the army officer who was stabbed yesterday. And police are not treating the incident as terror-related. The man who was wearing army uniform at the time was seriously injured after he was repeatedly stabbed by a masked attacker. And GB News' Home and Security Editor Mark White reports from Gillingham.
Well, here at the scene of this knife attack throughout the afternoon, police forensic teams have been here carrying out an inch-by-inch search of the crime scene, looking for any clues that can help piece together the events of yesterday evening, when just before 6 o'clock, that soldier, that army officer in uniform, was walking on the road behind me when he was attacked and stabbed multiple times. Now, GB News has obtained doorbell camera footage. It doesn't show the moment of the attack, but you can quite clearly hear the commotion, the blood-curdling screams as that attack was unfolding, and a warning for our viewers and listeners that listening to this, it is very distressing. Well, that doorbell camera footage was provided to us by Alex Reynolds, who just lives a couple of doors up from the scene of this attack. And on hearing those screams, Mr. Reynolds felt he had to push forward. He had to come down here to see if he could help. And this is what he told us of what he saw.
Thought immediately that it was perhaps just a scuffle in the street, perhaps on the neighbouring street. But as the screams became more harrowing and piercing, you realised that it was something more serious. I think initially my father said not to go out, but a minute later I went out to sit to the corner and could see a good 6 or 7 people around the victim, around the body that was lying on the pavement.
Well, the police investigation is continuing apace, and as yet they have found no indication as to what the motivation was for this horrific attack. They haven't found anything to suggest that it may have been motivated by terrorism. That might change in the hours and days ahead, depending on what they find. Now, throughout the day, we've been hearing from senior politicians and military leaders who have been passing on their thoughts and good wishes to the victim of this attack. We've been hearing from the Defence Secretary, John Healey.
My thoughts are with the victim and his family. The best wishes of our government and everyone who serves in our armed forces are with him. Our thoughts are with the family, and we want to see him make a swift and full recovery.
Well, the scene of the attack remains sealed off, as does the spot where the main suspect was arrested by police not far from here in Rochester. A number of knives were recovered during that arrest.
Of course, we'll have all the latest on that story as more evidence and information comes our way. And an astonishing eyewitness testimony from the scene earlier of somebody who rushed out to help, who said blood was everywhere as I tried to apply pressure to his wounds until the police arrived. The guy was looking for a soldier to attack. When the guy's wife came out and started trying to pull the guy off him, he didn't even try to hurt her. He only had his sights set on hurting a British soldier. And of course, that brings back chilling memories of the murder of Lee Rigby in May 2013. We'll have full updates on that story throughout the coming days as we have them. Now, moving on to the latest on the investigation into the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. You can see live pictures now on your screen. The director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, is currently being questioned by the House Judiciary Committee. And viewers on GB News can see those live pictures now from Washington, D.C. We carried quite a lot of that evidence earlier on. Some astonishing lines and revelations came out of us. And to discuss them now, I'm joined by California Democratic Party's Bob Mulholland. Bob, welcome to the show. It's always a pleasure to have your company. So we've seen some incredible evidence this week. It was the Secret Service director's turn on Monday. Yesterday, she resigned. Today, it's Christopher Wray's turn, the director of the FBI. Some incredible information has come out so far. Bob, talk us through what you think were the most standout pieces of information.
Well, as I've always told people, I'm old enough to remember President Kennedy's assassination. Of course, we had Reagan's attempt and President Ford twice. That it's best when you're a presidential candidate, don't do outdoor rallies. This is a country, America, that's full of guns, full of people with mental problems. And I think the Secret Service yesterday advised both campaigns, don't do any outdoor rallies. It's very difficult. You know, I served in Vietnam. It's very difficult to prevent somebody shooting you when you're on the outside. On the inside, presidential candidates have massive security. Everybody's checked, and it's hard to get a weapon into an inside. So fortunately, the guy didn't have a bump gun because he would have killed a number of people on that stage. And it'll take a few months for the investigation. Yes, the Secret Service director retired at some point. But the FBI will do a good job trying to figure it out. But this is an example of human nature. Here you had local law enforcement seeing this guy walking around with a rangefinder, climbing up on a roof, and instead of just firing a couple bullets into the ground to get everybody's attention, including the Secret Service, who would immediately shut everything down, no, they got on the radio to talk to somebody, kind of a middleman. And the result is one guy dead and two people end up in the hospital, and then candidate Trump had injuries to his ear.
And Bob, just to bring viewers up to speed who might be joining us about some of the key revelations of today's evidence from Christopher Wray, the FBI director. First of all, he said that the shooter, Thomas Matthew Crooks, did send a drone up 2 hours before the shooting, 200 yards away, to survey and map out the scene. He wasn't intercepted at that point. An astonishing revelation then, Bob Mulholland. 2 explosive devices were found in the shooter's car with receivers on them, and a transmitter found on his dead body after he'd been killed himself. So the clear intimation there, maybe he was planning to set off a couple of bombs in his car as well. A further bomb was found at his home, as were 14 firearms in the house, all legally bought. I guess there's a whole conversation there about gun control. No clear picture of his motivation at this stage. The devices he used, his mobile phone, were encrypted. The FBI is still working on cracking them. No evidence of accomplices. And he did concur with your point, Bob Mulholland, by saying we are living in an elevated threat environment. It's a dangerous time to be a presidential nominee or a politician in the United States.
Yeah, in our history, we've had 4 presidents assassinated and killed. So it's not unusual for everyone around a president. Obviously, Lincoln was one of the tragedies of America in the 1800s, that you've got to be careful. And I hope both campaigns do not do any outdoor rallies. And it's interesting, you mentioned about the 14 guns. The father of this individual that was killed by the Secret Service had evidently called the police before this incident happened. So clearly the father had some sense that his son had some trouble. And maybe the father should have called the police a couple of days before. And maybe the father should not have 14 guns laying around, especially an AR-15, which, you know, we used an M16 in Vietnam. They're very dangerous, very dangerous.
And Bob, looking into his computer devices, because of course the next big questions are what was the motivation for this attack? Was it specifically a dislike or a hatred of Donald Trump? Well, so far, multiple searches for public figures have appeared on the shooter's computer. No specific targeting of Donald Trump at this stage. And we do know that he was a member of the Republican Party, but also that he donated to a Democrat cause at some point. So still unclear as to the motivations. But how do you think this will influence, Bob Mulholland, the remainder of the presidential campaign? Because for a while, maybe 24 hours, it seemed there might be unity politics, a call for calm. It seems actually that we're back to trading blows in the political campaign for the presidential trail. We're back to business as normal.
Well, the American people like a good cage fight, and we always want a good cage fight. You don't want one guy on the tarp yelling and screaming, and the other side is not even up on the tarp, still sitting down. That goes. Even our founding fathers, who we all loved, actually wrote a lot of letters attacking each other. So that's very normal. And on this individual, his high school classmates have been interviewed and said he was bullied a lot. He was very smart, but he was bullied a lot. And I don't know if that had any reason to motivate him, but he was looking at websites looking for a number of people. And then when this thing was announced, he immediately got his drone up. You know, it's quite interesting. A 20-year-old has a drone up, and the defense of a presidential candidate, doesn't have a drone up. Drones are the way of life. So hopefully the Secret Service put them up everywhere, even if it's an indoor rally.
And Bob Mulholland, finally, a lot of people in the UK are looking on at this and just thinking, how on earth did such a cataclysmic chain of errors lead to a young lad who got his dad's gun, climbing on a roof, taking pot shots at the guy who could be the future president of the USA without detection until too late? Bombs in the car. It just seems like such a huge, huge chain of errors.
Yes, and interesting where this 20-year-old on the roof, inside that warehouse was local law enforcement staging. I don't know if they're having coffee and donuts, but they should have been outside checking everything. And in this particular case, that 20-year-old was seen an hour or so before walking around an area where nobody else was. So yes, it was a complete failure by the whole apparatus. But that never overestimate the intellectual capacity of humans. As humans, we think nothing happened today, so nothing happens to the next day. That's not true. It only takes one guy who never talks to anybody on his own, especially in America, get gun, get explosives. You know, Oswald, who killed Kennedy, he got that gun through the mail, like $12, you know, like 10 pounds back in '63. And we allow that. And I don't see that changing.
OK, well, thank you for joining us, California Democratic Party's Bob Mulholland. Truly, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. And get lots more on that story on our website. And thanks to you, GBNews.com is the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got breaking news and all the brilliant analysis that you've come to expect from GB News. So thank you very much. Now, still plenty of time to grab your chance to win £30,000 in the Great British Giveaway. It's our biggest cash prize of the year, and it's totally tax-free. Now, what would you do with all that wonga? Well, here's how you could win it all.
Don't miss your chance to win our Super Summer Giveaway. With your chance to win £30,000 cash, our biggest cash prize to date. Which means you get to spend every single penny however you like. What plans would you make with an extra £30,000 cash in your bank account? Take your family on the ultimate holiday, buy that treat that's always seemed out of reach, or just put it in the bank for a later date. However you'd spend it, make sure you don't miss out. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Fill your boots. Now, James Cleverly has announced that he'll bid to become the new Conservative Party leader. Is he the right man to replace Rishi Sunak? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
A new report suggests that Prince Harry is lonely in California and he's considering returning to Britain despite a seismic falling out with his father and his brother.
But the question we're asking this morning is whether Meghan would come with her Prince Charming or whether Harry would perhaps be more welcome here if he came solo.
Like Kinsey, we'll go to Kinsey Schofield live now in LA. Kinsey, we've got lots of time to talk about this and speculate this. We've got about 6 minutes or so to talk. But what's behind all of this? Where are these thoughts coming from?
They're coming from royal author Hugo Vickers, and I don't know if you're familiar with Mr. Vickers, but he's written over 30 books about the British royal family. And he told The Sun that Prince Harry will ultimately return to the UK with his tail between his legs. He described the Duke of Sussex as angry and says Harry is genuinely petrified of losing his wife, Meghan Markle. When asked his predictions for where Harry and Meghan will be in the next 20 years, Vickers told The Sun, I think he'll come home, explaining, I think Harry will come home, and if he comes home, we must be very nice to him because he won't particularly want to. He's quite angry, suggesting that he would be coming home solo. Vickers also said that Prince Harry looks slightly petrified of Meghan Markle and that King Charles has left the door wide open for Harry's return if and when he does decide to come back.
I can only imagine the culture shock that Prince Harry has faced arriving there. This is a kid that has grown up in castles.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:25. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, James Cleverly is the first Tory leadership hopeful to declare his candidacy in the race to replace Rishi Sunak. He says the Conservative Party has spent too much time rowing and now it needs to show more self-discipline. But former Home Secretary Suella Braverman says their party needs to reject divisive identity politics and woke nonsense in a bid to win back voters from the Reform Party. Well, Stamford in Lincolnshire has a Tory MP, and we asked people there who they think should be the party's next leader.
Oh, I think they should go bankrupt. That'd be rather lovely. There's very few decent people in the Tory party. I certainly don't want Liz Truss or Johnson back again.
Well, they should be looking to appeal to their core voters and the policies that they present. Taxation for one issue. A main issue, a reason why I failed to vote for them this time.
There are no statesmen anymore. I don't consider Starmer to be a statesman or statesman material.
Well, there we go, and I'm joined in the studio now by the Deputy Political Editor of the Financial Times, my good pal Jim Pickard. Jim, welcome to the studio. Cleverly says he's the only man who can unite the Tories, but his plan is to appeal to Liberal Democrat voters, to Reform voters, to Labour voters. He can't do that, and I was struck there by a huge sense of crushing apathy amongst Conservative voters about who the next leader is anyway. What's your take?
I mean, the situation we're looking at is a situation where the Conservative Party went from around 44% of the vote in 2019 to around 24% of the vote. They're almost halved. And all of those previous Tory voters have gone somewhere. So I can see the logic of James Cleverly wanting to try and pull them back from where they went a couple of weeks ago. The problem is, though, the public was fed up with the Conservatives. They thought they were incompetent. And therefore, we're going to see this battle within the Conservative Party about do they go a little bit left, do they go a little bit right? Whereas what the public want to see is competent leadership. If you look at the polling on this, it's not about left-wing this, right-wing this. It's about can you run a bathtub?
And he's saying here about we need to stop these self-indulgent, petty infighting. He's, of course, he's talking about do we swing towards the right, the Farage end of the spectrum, or should we try, as he's trying to set out here, to be all things to all people? But I'm struck always by listening to Conservative voters. When you look at the below-the-line comments on GB News, on The Telegraph, on The Express, on The Mail, they seem to want the party to actually become a proper Conservative party and don't try and woo Liberal Democrat voters, don't try and woo Labour voters, actually be Conservative. With that in mind, who do you think they want to actually be the leader of the Tories?
So I have a different view on this, and maybe this is because I know a lot of former Tory supporters in the south of England, and they take a different view, white-collar, former Conservatives who were quite happy with One Nation conservatism. They liked people like David Cameron. They didn't necessarily hate Rishi Sunak, but they were fed up with the Conservatives after 14 years.
But that Tory party got its butt absolutely kicked at the election.
But but Liz Truss also didn't exactly succeed. If you look at the polling on Liz Truss, who led the party a bit to the right, she was basically crushed in the polls and then crushed in the financial markets as well. I just think that if the Conservative Party tries to go to the right, they will, of course, be competing with Reform and Nigel Farage. And is there enough space for both of those parties? And if they lean too far right, that they have any chance of coming back in Tunbridge Wells, in Kensington, in parts of the prosperous southwest of England? It's a very, very difficult dilemma for them. But I think what they need is they need a long period where they look competent, where they look interesting, but the problem they've got is it's very hard to look competent if you're not in power and you have no levers and nothing you do actually changes anything at all because you're not in government.
Well, the process is going to rumble on until November, so by that time most people might have nodded off. Let's talk about the The Labour Party rebellion last night. Tough guy Sir Keir Starmer, or was it? He suspended the whip from 7 of the left-leaning Labour MPs who defied them on the 2-child benefit cap. What do you make of this? Because on the one hand, he's got rid of quite a few of the old Corbynistas, the John McDonnells, the Rebecca Long-Baileys, Espana Begum, Zara Sultana. Is this him continuing his purge of the rump of the Corbynistas, or is it something else?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we're looking at here is we're looking at Keir Starmer, who, of course, served in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet and seemed like a loyal supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, absolutely massacring that wing of the party, leaving them without even a toehold of power within Labour, because Keir Starmer strongly believes that only from the centre ground can you win elections. And the proof of the pudding is that he's sitting on a ginormous majority right now. I just wonder a little bit about whether being outflanked from the left by even the Liberal Democrats on this issue could store up a little bit of a problem in terms of long-standing left-wing supporters of Labour, losing the vestigial remains of the support they had for him. But the other thing that this vote really brought home incredibly strongly is, for the Labour Party, over 300 votes, for the serried ranks of Lib Dems, left-wing Labour rebels, SNP, Greens, together they could barely muster around 100 votes, and it just shows again that complete monopoly of power that Starmer has for now.
And I guess he can spare 7 votes because he's got such a whopping majority. Jim Pickard, always a delight to have you in the studio. Thank you very much for joining us today. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, and later in the hour I discuss the report that's revealed that profits from the Crown Estate soared to a staggering £1.1 billion last year. But first, it's your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour. Police in Kent say the stabbing of a British Army officer near a barracks in Gillingham isn't being treated as terrorism at this stage. However, they are being supported by counter-terror specialists. Detectives are continuing, meanwhile, their investigations after witnesses reported hearing screams just before 6 o'clock yesterday evening in Gillingham. Locals rushed to help the army officer, including his wife, just in time to see the attacker, who was wearing a mask, flee on a moped. A suspect was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. About 20 minutes later, the victim, aged in his 40s, was taken to hospital with serious injuries. Also in the news today, Sir Keir Starmer accused the previous government of losing control of Britain's borders as he took part in the first PMQs as Prime Minister. Reform UK's Rupert Lowe quizzed the Prime Minister on Labour's migration plans, claiming that a failure to control the borders has damaged communities. The Prime Minister conceded that channel crossings are a serious issue, but laid the blame on the Tories.
I'm not sure I agree with his numbers, but look, I do think that it's serious that the previous government lost control of our borders. Record numbers have crossed the Channel. Since the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Prime Minister for 18 months, 50,000 people crossed the Channel. It's a serious issue that requires a serious answer. And that is why we will set up our Border Security Command to take down the gangs that are running this vile trade. What we won't do is waste further time on a gimmick that cost a fortune and remove just 4 volunteers.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak used today's session of Prime Minister's questions to call for tougher sanctions on Russia, saying the work of the previous government had laid the groundwork for stronger action against Moscow, which he said would fund Ukraine's reconstruction. In a lighter tone, the former Prime Minister also sent his best wishes to Britain's Olympians.
And I also join with the Prime Minister in his warm words about our Olympic athletes.
Yeah.
I've no doubt that after years of training, focus and dedication, they'll bring back many gold medals. Although, to be honest, I'm probably not the first person they want to hear advice from on how to win. But I'm glad in our exchanges.
Rishi Sunak. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm back in half an hour with more news.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report. Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you very much, Polly. Now, if you want to get in touch with us here at GB News, simply go to gbnews.com/your say. Keep them coming. I'll read out the best of your messages a little later in the show. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Following a bright start to Wednesday in many places, it is now turning increasingly cloudy with outbreaks of rain moving into the west. This frontal system is coming in after a ridge of high pressure led to a fine start, and we'll keep the sunshine in the evening in the east, 1 or 2 showers, but otherwise largely dry, whilst elsewhere thickening areas of cloud, increasingly low cloud as well, leading to widespread mist, hill fog and drizzle across western parts, along with outbreaks of more persistent rain, especially towards the southwest. But with the increased cloud and humidity, it's going to be a mild, some might say muggy night, 16 Celsius by dawn in a few spots. But in the south and especially the southwest, extensive low cloud, mist, hill fog and some more persistent rain pushing into the south of Devon and Cornwall. Across Wales and much of the rest of England, it's cloudy first thing, the worst of the damp and gloomy weather over western hills. Northern Ireland, likewise extensive cloud, a few showers, showery rain affecting western Scotland, but some brightness early on across parts of eastern Scotland. Really limited brightness, to be honest, with a lot of cloud affecting many parts of the UK. And through the morning and early afternoon, we're going to see some heavier and more prolonged bursts of rain affecting southern counties, increasingly pushing east through the day. Elsewhere, skies will turn brighter, the sun will come through in a few spots, but also some showers into the northwest, and feeling cooler because of the increased cloud cover across many parts of the UK. Now we're going to see those outbreaks of rain in the south and southeast continuing into Thursday evening, perhaps turning heavier again for a time, before eventually that clears away. And Friday's effectively a day of sunny spells and showers. The heaviest showers will be in the north, likewise for Saturday, and it will be a bit cooler.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Gary King. In Surrey, the northbound M23, all traffic being held at the moment. Long delays building after a breakdown. It's just near to the M25 interchange. In Hertfordshire on the M25 clockwise, looking busy after an earlier emergency repairs around junction 17 at Maple Cross. Wales, the westbound M4 has lane closed and delays after an accident between junction 36 at Bridgend and 37 at Pyle. In Cheshire, the northbound M6 looking busy after an earlier accident between junction 20 at the M56 and 21 at Woolston. Glasgow, the M8 eastbound currently blocked. Long delays there due to an accident involving several vehicles around junction 13 at the M80. No trains eastbound between Salisbury and Southampton Central because of safety checks. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:38. We're on the final furlong. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, it's good news for the royal family today. Bumper news, in fact, because profits from the Crown Estate have more than doubled to a staggering £1.1 billion. It means the sovereign grant, which supports the official duties of the royal family, will increase from £86.3 million to £132 million. To discuss this bumper royal payday, I'm joined now by the former BBC royal correspondent, the great Michael Cole. Michael, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. Wow, what a payday for the royals. A £658 million surge. That's just the extra from last year. And Michael, call me a cynic, Does this give away while Prince Charles might be so into green energy? Because most of that is made from offshore wind farms. No wonder he's always singing the credentials of green energy. He's making a packet from it.
Martin, great to speak to you this afternoon. You make some terrific points there, but let me just explain that the ancestral, the historic lands owned by the monarch, the Crown, are administered by a corporation called the Crown Estates. And all the income, all the revenues from that, and you just said it's £1.1 billion, that all goes to the government. It goes into the exchequer. And in exchange for that, it's an unequal bargain, because in exchange for that, you get the sovereign grant. And the sovereign grant was £83.6 million. Now, that is 1/13 part of the profit made by the Crown Estates. But as you say, the money, or much of it, comes from leasing off parts of the seabed, which are owned traditionally and historically by the monarch, to firms that want to set up wind farms at sea. So the money actually doesn't go to the man, despite him wearing that beautiful crown with how many diamonds I couldn't possibly count. In fact, in the Sunday Times rich list, the king is actually only at number 258, with a fortune said to be £610 million. Well, that's quite a lot of money to the likes of you and me, but it's a lot less than somebody like Sir Jim Ratcliffe owns. So the point is that the monarch doesn't exploit these lands, doesn't sell them on, manages them, holds them in trust for the next generation. And the revenue that comes from the Crown Estates goes to the revenue, goes in taxes, if you will, and helps to finance the Treasury so that our wonderful politicians can spend it or waste it on their pet schemes.
So, Michael Cole, when those pesky Republicans keep reminding us or telling us or trying to convince us that the royal family are leeching money off the state, in actual fact, they're generating a whopping great wad of cash for the government, for the country, via the Crown Estate. Therefore, QED, in your opinion, quite simply, they represent great value for money.
Well, it's a wealth generation point. But as you say, and it's a very good point, the king has been very, very keen on alternative energy sources, and he's been behind a lot of these schemes, even on his own estates, for wind farms, even quite a modest little one, about 25 acres at Sandringham. So he's been behind that. But that doesn't compare anything like what is happening offshore, mainly in the North Sea, but also in the Irish Sea off Lancashire and Cumberland, where these properties, the use of the seabed for wind pylons, turbines, is very wealthy, valuable currency. And it's being bought up by companies who are putting up these monster pylons and are making money out of it. So it's a two-way street, but it doesn't go into the back pocket of the man we see there, into his elegant suit back pocket. Of course it doesn't. It goes to the government, it goes to the exchequer, it goes to mitigate all the taxes that we all have to pay to keep the show on the road, which is what we do. And I hope that the new Prime Minister is making sounds like he understands that he is a guardian of our best interests and that he shouldn't waste our money. Rachel Reeves has been saying something very similar, and I hope that in 4 years' time we can say that she kept to her word.
And Michael, also out in the information today are the number of foreign royal trips are down. Perhaps no surprises when you look at some of the health conditions of some of the top royals. But King Charles still been very busy despite his prostate cancer diagnosis and treatment.
Yeah, that's right, because the Princess of Wales and almost simultaneously the King revealed that they were suffering from cancer following on their surgery in the London clinic back in January. It obviously has limited the programs that they can pursue. But the king is still doing a lot. He went to Kenya, if you remember. There was the state visit to France and also to Germany. And upcoming is the visit to Samoa for CHOGM, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and a tour of Australia. So he's doing his best, and I think it's quite a good best. He obviously has waited 70 years for this job, and he's going to put as much as his heart and soul into it as he possibly can. It's interesting, just to revert to the royal finances, the electricity bill at Buckingham Palace has gone up considerably. And I wonder if that's because the Queen is no longer with us, because she famously went round the palace to switching off lights when the room wasn't being used. Something I fully approve of and rather do myself. I don't live in Buckingham Palace, but if I did, I would do the same. But the electricity bill has gone up, so that's another thing the royal family have in common with the rest of us. And there we see, we wish the Queen was there, still switching off the lights when they weren't used.
And another final piece of detail is that Frogmore Cottage is still empty. Of course, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's former home, it's still empty. Why is that? A certain royal doesn't seem to want to move in.
This is a rather fraught story, isn't it? This range of buildings was once 3 different residences for members of staff. It was lumped together to the specification of Meghan Markle. I think a lot of money, I haven't got the figure in my head at the moment, was spent upon it, many millions at the taste of Meghan Markle. To give Prince Harry full credit, he repaid the money when they suddenly scarpered off to initially Canada and then to California, which may have been her destination all along. The king has been trying to persuade his younger brother, Prince Andrew, to move out of Royal Lodge in the middle of Windsor Great Park, a glorious white wedding cake of a building, into Frogmore Cottage. And Prince Andrew is sticking fast. He's pointing out that he's got a long lease on it, and it's a repairing lease, which means that he's responsible for the repairs, of which there are many being made and are necessary at this moment. So it's a bit of a standoff there. Meanwhile, the Prince and Princess of Wales, who would fit into Royal Lodge very, very happily with their 3 children, they're making do in Adelaide Cottage, which is not a particularly grand building in Windsor Great Park and was used in the past by members of staff, including Group Captain Peter Townsend, who famously had a love affair with Princess Margaret, the late Queen's sister. His wife, who later divorced him, of course, said it was the coldest place she'd ever been to in all her life. So Adelaide Cottage may have echoes of sunny Australia, but it's not a nice place in January or February.
OK, Michael Cole, I have to flick off your switch now, sadly. Always a delight to have you on the show. Thank you very much. Now, 6-time Olympic medalist Charlotte Desjardins has been banned from competing in this year's Games after a disturbing video emerged of her whipping a horse repeatedly. I'm shortly going to be joined by a horse expert to discuss this story. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
When you think of the latest culinary trends, it might not be prawn cocktail, toad in the hole, or a jam roly-poly that springs to mind. But it's not for Gen Z or Gen Z TikTokers who are determined to make a comeback for these British classics. Now, 2/3 of Gen Z now rely on TikTok for cooking ideas. So is it time for the revival of the best of British dishes? Restaurant critic William Sitwell, good to see you this morning. For us, these things never went out of style. They've always been eating the prawn cocktail, the toad in the hole, the cottage pies. It's the best kind of food.
I think the main thing is in terms of trends. We've seen this for not decades, but literally centuries. The trends in food publishing, and it doesn't matter if it's on digital in a book, always goes. The swing is from complicated, modern, faddy to traditional, simple, and so on. So there's been this thing in publishing for literally centuries where you go from, for example, Jamie Oliver's sort of 7-minute, is it 3-minute meals, to the next trend, which is that's too simple. We need to take time and we need to get back to traditional food. The other thing is, and I think, if you are a food faddist, if you're obsessed with fermented cabbage and putting kimchi on everything, then you might have missed out on some of these wonderful traditions. Good food exists because it nourishes the soul. Good traditional recipes, British recipes, are not impossible to cook. So even the loonies on TikTok, I'm so glad I'm as ignorant as TikTok as you guys are of kimchi.
Yeah, and William, actually, this kind of food is so satiating, full of nutrients. I was saying to Ellie off air, our grandparents lived on this stuff, meat, potatoes and veg. It was quite simple.
The People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
She could have saved Storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. A disturbing video has emerged on social media of Team GB Olympian Charlotte Desjardins whipping a horse. It shows Desjardins hitting the horse with a long whip at least 25 times during a lesson for another rider. The 6-time Olympic medalist won't compete at the Paris Olympics. And to discuss this, I'm now joined by the horse consultant at Animal Aid, Dean Stansel. Dean, welcome to the show. So this video has horrified the nation, really. What's your take on it?
Well, one of shock, but certainly not one that I wouldn't have expected. We see that animals in sport are abused, not only this incident, but they're abused almost every day on British racecourses. They are animals in sport, and we see the whip used every day in horse racing. So why should we be any more alarmed by this? Of course, this is a shocking incident that has caused pain and abuse to a horse, and this should actually carry, I would say, a penalty by removing Charlotte Desjardins from equestrian events altogether. She's got to be used as an example. But I think the wider issue is, why are we doing this to animals in sport? Why are we whipping horses every day on racecourses? Why are horses getting killed in horse sports? The problem is that it's self-regulated, and that has to change. The industry has to be questioned and made accountable. And this is an incident that has brought that to light.
Dean, what do you say to those people who say this is just a part of how animals are trained? It's not necessarily pleasant, but this is what they do. Do they have a point, or is there no place for anything like this in equestrian events at all?
There's no place for this at all, Martin, in a civilised society. Horses are particularly sensitive animals, and they're easily intimidated into submission. And this is what we saw with in the video of Charlotte Desjardins. So we see this on racecourses every day. We see it in cross-country events that will be shown at the Olympics. We will see it in show jumping. And we will particularly see it in this form of dressage that she was involved in. Of course, dressage isn't only about horses looking pretty and prancing about an arena. It's about control of a horse. These horses have crank nose bands on that keep the mouths tightly shut. The riders use spurs. They're double bridled. They've got 2 bits in the mouth. These are these are welfare issues. You know, the whip is a very visible thing, but there are also other issues going on when we see horses in a dressage environment that the public is perhaps not aware of. And of course, there's 200 horses.
I'm afraid we have to leave it there. We've simply run out of time, but thank you very much for joining me. And that's it from me, but Jubes & Co. is up next. And don't forget to join us from 6 a.m. tomorrow. It's breakfast with Stephen and Ellie, followed by Britain's Newsroom at 9:30. And then Tom and Emily with Good Afternoon Britain from midday. My Mush is back at 3 p.m. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now it's your weather with Aidan McGibbon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Following a bright start to Wednesday in many places, it is now turning increasingly cloudy with outbreaks of rain moving into the west. This frontal system is coming in after a ridge of high pressure led to a fine start, and we'll keep the sunshine in the evening in the east, 1 or 2 showers, but otherwise largely dry, whilst elsewhere thickening areas of cloud, increasingly low cloud as well, leading to widespread mist, hill fog and drizzle across western parts, along with outbreaks of more persistent rain, especially towards the southwest. But with the increased cloud and humidity, it's going to be a mild, some might say muggy night, 16 Celsius by dawn in a few spots. But in the south and especially the southwest, extensive low cloud, mist, hill fog and some more persistent rain pushing into the south of Devon and Cornwall. Across Wales and much of the rest of England, it's cloudy first thing, the worst of the damp and gloomy weather over western hills. Northern Ireland, likewise extensive cloud, a few showers, showery rain affecting western Scotland, but some brightness early on across parts of eastern Scotland. Really limited brightness, to be honest, with a lot of cloud affecting many parts of the UK. And through the morning and early afternoon, we're going to see some heavier and more prolonged bursts of rain affecting southern counties, increasingly pushing east through the day. Elsewhere, skies will turn brighter, the sun will come through in a few spots, but also some showers into the northwest, and feeling cooler because of the increased cloud cover across many parts of the UK. Now we're going to see those outbreaks of rain in the south and southeast continuing into Thursday evening, perhaps turning heavier again for a time, before eventually that clears away. And Friday's effectively a day of sunny spells and showers. The heaviest showers will be in the north, likewise for Saturday, and it will be a bit cooler.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Gary King in Kent. The clockwise M25, all traffic being held at the moment. Long delays after an accident involving several vehicles just before Junction 1B at Dartford. Delays though back across into Essex at Junction 29 at Romford in Berkshire on the anti-clockwise M25. 2 lanes closed, long delays after a breakdown. It's just near to Junction 13 at Staines. Buckinghamshire clockwise on the M25, there's a lane closed, long delays after a breakdown just after Junction 16 at the M40 in West Yorkshire. The southbound M1 has a lane closed as well due to a breakdown around Junction 45 at Leeds Cross Green. And in Glasgow, the M8 eastbound remains blocked. Long delays after an accident involving several vehicles around Junction 13 at the M80.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
£30,000 in cash has to be won. It's our biggest cash prize so far, and it could be yours. Charles was a winner. Listen to what he says about winning the Great British Giveaway.
I'm Charles. I won £18,000 cash. It was just amazing, and as soon as it goes into your bank account, it just changed. It's a life-changing thing.
The next big winner could be you, with an extra £30,000 cash in your bank.